Everyone, this is the Wednesday, March 31st, 2021 morning session of the Portland City Council. Welcome, everyone. Keelan, please call the roll.
Rubio.
Here.
Ryan.
Here.
Hardesty.
Here.
Maps.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Under Portland City Code and state law, the City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of the council are attending remotely by video and teleconference, and the city has made several avenues available to the public to listen to the audio broadcast of the meeting. The meeting is available to the public on the city's YouTube channel, eGovPDX, and www.portlandoregon.gov/video, as well as channel 30. The public can always provide written testimony to the council by emailing the council clerk at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. The council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and to promote physical distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you for your patience, flexibility, and understanding as we work to continue to manage the city's business under these challenging circumstances. Thank you all for your understanding. And with that, we will hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good morning.
Good morning. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office or communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. The published council agenda at portlandoregon.gov/auditor contains information about how and when you may sign up for testimony while the City Council is holding electronic meetings. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When your time is up, the presiding officer will ask you to conclude. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being placed on hold or ejected from the remainder of the electronic meeting. Please be aware that all council meetings are recorded.
Very good, thank you. First up, Keelan, is communications. The first individual is under item 186.
Request of Tony Davis to address council regarding acknowledgement of public riots. And Tony has canceled their request today.
Okay, next up, next individual is item 187.
Request of Janet Hawkins to address council regarding audit of the Office of Civic Life.
Hi, Janet.
Hi, Mayor Wheeler, good morning.
Morning.
Mayor Wheeler and council members. My name is Janet Hawkins and I live in Southwest Portland. I'm here to testify on the outside review of the Office of Civic Life. I've been active in my neighborhood association for a decade, and I want to say I'm here representing my own views. I'm asking the council and Commissioner Hardesty in particular to release the outside review document that was commissioned last year and completed 2 months ago. Commissioner Hardesty's office has held this report for the last 2 months, ostensibly to conduct an analysis of the information, and I believe there's been ample time to conduct this work. The city has an obligation to present this information to current and former Civic Life employees and to the public. The delay in releasing the outside review is concerning for numerous reasons. Employee workplace complaints are still unresolved after 2 years. This is important because we are failing these employees in delaying actions on the findings of the outside review. We're also failing Portlanders. Oregon Public Broadcasting published an article on the Office of Civic Life titled "A Culture of Fear." This article was published earlier this month. The article highlighted the impact of a toxic workplace on Civic Life's employees, as well as on its community engagement programs. I recognize that the outside review will contain confidential employee information, which should not be released as public information. Importantly, it will also contain non-confidential information on the Civic Life workplace as well as its community profile. As a start, Commissioner Hardy's office could release the review's executive summary and its recommendations. The reality is the broken management of Civic Life impacts the entire city. The bullying, harassing, and retaliatory behaviors described in the OPB article escaped out of City Hall and found their way into our community. Civic Life has a documented history of contentious communications with neighborhoods, and there are ongoing complaints against the office for unethical contracting practices. It's too simple to argue that Civic Life's structural challenges are due to its portfolio of diverse programs. Let's learn from the outside review about whether Civic Life's management is effective or inadequate. The City of Portland's core values resolution speaks to knowledge sharing, accountability, and transparent budgetary decisions. Delays in releasing public information diminish our trust in government. The city's core values will go unrealized without the trust and support of Portlanders. The City of Portland is now engaged in a difficult budget process, which will determine the future of civic involvement in our government. Can we really entrust budget dollars to the Office of Civic Life without a full review and response to the outside review? I respectfully ask the City Council for the public release of the Office of Civic Life's outside review document. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you. I believe your name was Christina. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the name. I will be briefed next week on this audit, and as the commissioner in charge, I will make sure that, as I've been doing, continue to gather information and share it with my colleagues as appropriate, and we will be moving forward with changes in a timely manner. Appreciate you being here and sharing your concern, but the document actually, I haven't been briefed yet, so of course no one else on the council has. But action is coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Janet. Appreciate your being here.
Janet, my apologies, Janet. I just blanked on the name.
Not a problem.
Next item is item 188. Next individual is under item 188.
Request of Lauren Armany to address council regarding community involvement in the formation and reapplication of enhanced services district contracts.
Good morning, Lauren.
Good morning. Yes, thank you for letting me speak today. I am here representing a coalition of organizers and small businesses and people who live, love, and work in the Clean and Safe Enhanced Service District. So, and a copy of this letter has been sent to all of your inboxes, and we've already met with many of you. And if we haven't, please expect to hear from us very shortly. Dear Mayor, Commissioners, Officers, Office of Management and Finance, we, the undersigned organizations, urge City Council to accept the City Auditor's recommendation to review Portland's 3 enhanced service districts' purpose and the city's responsibility to oversee them as put forth in their award-winning audit titled Enhanced Services Districts, Cities Provide Little Oversight of Privately Funded Public Services, report number 529 from August 2020. As Portlanders, we are committed to fostering an equitable community that faithfully represents the shared values of its residents. While some proponents of ESDs cite their potential to promote public safety, we are deeply concerned that the demonstrated lack of city oversight of privatized policing in public space can contribute to discriminatory outcomes that disproportionately affect Portland's most vulnerable. The auditor suggests a comprehensive review of the districts, their purposes, and the city's responsibility for them. Within that review, the auditor crucially asks the city to determine whether or not these districts shall continue to provide services in public space. We fully support this recommendation and ask for a robust public input component to be included in the process. The process can include, but should not be limited to, a series of town halls outside of traditional business hours, specific and accessible engagement with communities who are historically disenfranchised from public processes, such as the unhoused community, and especially in times where technology is needed to connect and be participatory, at least one regular city council meeting where public comment is heard, and public streaming of the contract negotiation work sessions. It is important that those most affected by ESDs have a say in their future, including the unhoused community, small businesses, and residential tenants, and community organizations in the downtown area that pay for this specific clean and safe ESD through additional fees from property owners and building managers, parking meters and parking permits, but are not democratically represented in their decision-making. We urge you to begin the public examination of all ESDs as soon as possible and commit to not renewing any contracts until it is democratically decided that ESDs do in fact contribute toward our shared goal of making Portland a thriving community for all. We look forward to collaborating with the council in this endeavor, and this is undersigned by 350 PDX, the American Civil Liberties Union, Oregon Justice Resource Center, Portland Jobs with Justice, Portland Independent Business Bloc, Portland Metro People's Coalition, Stop the Sweeps, Sisters of the Road, and Western Regional Advocacy Project. Thank you, and look forward to hearing from us again soon.
Thank you for your testimony. Keelan, that completes communications, is that correct?
That's correct.
To the consent agenda, have any items been pulled off of the consent agenda?
Yes, item 192 has been pulled from the consent agenda by Edith Gillis.
Please call the roll on the remainder of the consent agenda.
Rubio.
Aye.
Ryan.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the consent agenda is adopted. We'll take up 192 at the end of the regular agenda. Colleagues, we've not reached the time for our first time certain item. We'll call item 194, please.
Proclaim March 31, 2021 to be Cesar Chavez Day.
Colleagues, Cesar Chavez was a civil rights and labor activist who was a champion for agricultural workers. His activism created protections for farm workers that are now codified in several states, including right here in the state of Oregon. However, much of his work remains unfinished. Despite being essential to our food system and economy, farm workers are still vastly underpaid, tend to work in miserable conditions, and lack many of the most basic workplace protections. In the United States, 73% of farm workers are immigrants and approximately half are undocumented. Since so many of our farm workers are undocumented, farm workers are often powerless to speak up about poor working conditions or labor law violations. We must continue the legacy of Cesar Chavez and ensure that farm workers can have a fair shot at the American dream like everybody else. At the national level, progress is being made with the recent passage of the Farm Workforce Modernization Act of 2021. This law will create a pathway to citizenship for undocumented farm workers, streamline the visa program for temporary agricultural workers, amongst other improvements. I want to thank Commissioner Rubio and Commissioner Hardesty for co-sponsoring this proclamation. I also want to thank my team for their work, especially Ocean Aoli for putting this proclamation together. Ocean's grandmother, a third generation Mexican-American, worked as a young child up and down the San Joaquin Valley in California and in Klamath Falls, Oregon, with her parents and sister picking grapes, apricots, and cotton, amongst other crops. I know this meant a lot for Ocean to be able to work on this proclamation. With that in mind, it means a lot for me to sponsor this proclamation as well. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Commissioner Rubio. Welcome and good morning.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, Mayor and council members, and also to our guest speakers today. March 31st is always an extra special day for me. Not only is it only the day that we're honoring Cesar Chavez, we also honor the contribution of farm workers, immigrant workers, and Latinx community contributions to this country and the state. But March 31st is also the birthday of my grandmother, Dolores Caballero Murillo, who was born in the very same year as Cesar Chavez. My grandparents were farm workers for all of their working years, and my abuela would work long days in the fields alongside my grandfather, yet remarkably, she still somehow managed to dress, feed, love, and care for a family that included 11 children during that time. And I think a lot about my grandmother and what her long days must have been like, and also the toll that a lifetime in this backbreaking work took on her body. And I also think about her hands, and I know that many of our guest speakers will know what I mean when I say that. Her hands were worn with decades of work outdoors, picking, pulling, sorting, and indoors, cooking, scrubbing, and holding little hands. And this is still a reality for so many in our community to this very day. And like then, our communities come out, have the courage to come out to advocate for justice, dignity, and respect. And in doing so, they risk their own livelihoods and their own homes and deportation in order to create a better life for their family. And Latinx frontline workers, agricultural workers too, are some of the most vulnerable and invisible and the most dependable and dependent on. And today they're still forced to fight for rights and supports that should have been made so long ago. And the pandemic has only made things so much worse. Because the reality is that while our immigrant and Latinx communities have made immense contributions to this economy, they still continue to be exploited and aren't able to fully participate in the benefits of the economy into which they have contributed so much. When many immigrant and frontline and service workers lost their jobs during the pandemic, many were ineligible for state unemployment and other federal aid and were then thrust into economic crisis. And for some, that meant the threat of food instability and homelessness. And while most people have stayed home, farm workers and frontline workers continued on so that quarantined people had food. And in doing so, they took on great personal risk, put their families at risk, and yet they still had to fight to be considered a vaccine top priority group, even after outbreaks among farming communities and disproportionately high rates of infection within the Latinx and other BIPOC communities. And farm workers just became eligible just a few days ago, long after other frontline workers. Our charge comes from Chavez directly. History will judge societies and governments by how effectively they respond to the needs of the poor and the helpless. And this is why we must continue to advocate for necessary changes in the system, like the Oregon Worker Relief Fund, universal representation and navigation, and farm worker overtime pay. And I encourage all of us today to learn more about supporting these efforts. And if you need more information, please contact my staff in my office or any of our guests, and they'll be more than happy to tell you how to support and get involved. And so today, on what would have been Cesar Chavez's and my grandmother's 94th birthday, I and we are humbly reminded about how the movement for justice continues. And so does our obligation to serve and to serve our community well, and to leading with love and humility. And also how we must never fail to recognize the contribution of the Oregon Latinx community, farm worker community, and all immigrant communities every day, not just once a year. Now, it is my honor to introduce 4 invited guests today to share a few words about the significance of today in their work, their activism, and their community. And I'm pleased to introduce our speakers who will speak in order of introduction. First, Reina Lopez is one of the fiercest advocates and most effective organizers in Oregon, and is a proud daughter of immigrants and the executive director of Pecun, one of Oregon's leading farm worker founded and Latinx-led organizations. Reina is an incredibly respected leader whose career has been fighting for immigrant farm worker justice and also justice on behalf of BIPOC in our intersectional communities. Martin Gonzalez is a longtime Portland community activist and leader, and also the unofficial historian in our community. Martin has been at the forefront of multiple issues such as worker justice, police accountability, education justice, and transportation equity, and was also the first elected Latino school board member to serve in the history of Portland Public Schools. Edith Quiroz is the executive director of El Programa Hispano, where she brings her leadership and passion for entrepreneurship, women's and Latinx empowerment, and building community. Edith is deeply respected for her experience in the nonprofit sector and in organizational development consulting. Tony DeFalco is the executive director of Latino Network, and he brings decades of experience in nonprofit management, fundraising, advocacy, and coalition building across diverse sectors in the region and state, and has a deep understanding of the issues facing our communities today. So welcome to our guests, and we will start off with Reina Lopez.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Mayor Wheeler and Portland City Commissioners, for the record, my name is Reina Lopez. I'm the Executive Director of PECUN, Oregon's Farm Worker Union, and also the President of the Pineros y Campesinos Unidos del Noroeste Labor Union, arm of PECUN. Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty and Rubio, for your constant support. In fact, I actually found an old photo from late 1980s of Commissioner Hardesty at one of our rallies. And just no gray hairs back then, but still that same energy. It was amazing. Today's Cesar Chavez Day, and he was born 94 years ago in San Luis Rio Colorado, Arizona. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to you and the members of the council for proclaiming this Cesar Chavez Day. PECUN was started by 80 farm workers 35 years ago with the help of Cesar and Dolores, and they brought the Si Se Puede spirit, and that legacy and that struggle to have the right to unionize continues here today in Oregon. I'm a daughter of immigrants. I came here to Oregon following the migration of farm work north, and my story starts. I'd like to start it off with my parents who left Mexico to come to Oregon looking for a better life. And here, as a kid, I picked blueberries, I picked marionberries, cherries, and even at one point, I picked worms with my dad, which was fun. Farm workers are essential, and they were essential before the pandemic. They are going to be essential after the pandemic and should be treated as essential. Yet time and time again, I hear the stories of my people, agricultural workers who feel forgotten. Essential yet disposable is what I'm told. And why? Because today, over 50% of workplace outbreaks due to the pandemic have hit our essential food supply chain workers the hardest. Because through the pandemic, the Latinx, Latina, Latino community has made up between 30 to 40%, in some counties up to 50% of the statewide COVID-19 cases, despite only being 13% of Oregon's population. Because undocumented workers have not been acknowledged as the backbone of our essential workforce, and because agricultural workers are being asked to do the most dangerous jobs without that being reflected in their pay. And because today, workers are being assigned labor housing with dozens of other workers, making social distancing practically impossible and conditions even more deadly. And because people across the state are dying to put food on our tables. People like 60-year-old agricultural worker J. Guadalupe Olivera Mendoza, presente, who went home ill one March day and died on a Monday, more than a week on a hospital ventilator. Or my old soccer mate's father, who worked in the same processing plant as my mother, who also passed away of COVID early in the pandemic. And because we're celebrating the contributions of farm workers today, and in Oregon and across the country, farm workers still have not gained the right to farm worker overtime or collective bargaining rights. While we acknowledge Cesar's contributions, we still have a long way to go to achieve farm worker justice. And today, I want to offer you some insight on some of the things that you could actually do today to support us. The Oregon legislature is debating whether to require growers to pay farm worker overtime pay, something that most other workers take for granted, but field and hand harvest workers do not actually have that legal protection under the law. House Bill 2358, which would guarantee overtime pay for piece rate and hourly farm workers, would be able to do that here in Oregon, and we join the ranks with Washington and California. I'd first like to start by pointing out the exclusion of farm workers from the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, which is a part of a shameful legacy of racism that initially targeted 85% of Southern African Americans who were farm workers in the 1930s. Today, most farm workers are Latinos. Excluding farm workers from overtime pay was wrong in the 30s. It's still wrong today. And farm workers are not second-class workers. They do not belong in a lower class working class in Oregon or the nation. And many workers in Oregon are already afforded overtime pay. This is why we should offer these basic protections to our farm workers. As a society, we've been accustomed to profiting and benefiting at the expense of farm workers. It's shameful to hear the growers talk about how this would just increase their labor costs and only talk about the bottom line. But during peak harvest seasons, our workers work from sunrise to sunset, and they spend very little time with their families. In many cases, children of farm workers myself included, were raised by babysitters, older siblings, and we understand that these circumstances have big impacts on families, and kids rarely get to spend time with their parents. And overtime laws exist because we believe that the risk of injury and wear and tear on workers' bodies are past a reasonable limit, and because we believe people's lives should include time to rest, time to be with their family, and off the job needs. To honor Cesar Chavez, I ask you to support this, and to continue to support expanding farm worker rights, including the right to unionize and improving labor housing conditions across the state, and also to chipping away at farm labor exclusions that stem from a racist history in this country. Cesar Chavez Day today, presente. Thank you, and la lucha sigue.
Thank you so much, Reina. That was amazing. Now we have Martin Gonzalez.
Let's see if this works. Hello, my name is Martin Gonzalez. I reside in Northeast Portland. I want to take this opportunity to thank Mayor Wheeler and Commissioner Hardesty and Rubio for introducing this proclamation for Cesar Chavez Day. It is an important symbolic gesture that conveys the recognition of the struggles of Chicanas, Chicanos, Latinos, Latinas, Hispanics, community members in Portland and throughout the nation. Cesar Chavez's lifelong dedication to the struggle is an example of the fact that our history is a history of struggle to maintain and defend our community, a community that shares a common language, culture, and history. Nuestra historia es una historia de lucha, and we have to march, protest, go to meetings after meetings, testify, write letters, and organize our community just to be heard and recognized, to press for our rights. And to be clear, it was not the work of just one individual, but a collective effort. And even in the midst of a pandemic, we can still that La Lucha is alive today. It's alive in the marches for Black lives and our demands for immigrant justice. I want to take this opportunity to remind council members that tomorrow, April 1st, is exactly 20 years since Portland police officers shot and killed day laborer Jose Santos Victor Mejia Pot. The deadly encounter began 2 days earlier when Mejia Pot had an epileptic seizure when trying to board a TriMet bus, but was 20 cents shy of the fare. Officers were called to the scene and dragged Mr. Mejia Pot off the bus and reportedly beat him before taking him to jail. He was released the same day, but had no money, and as an indigenous Mexican from the Yucatan Peninsula who did not speak English nor Spanish very well, didn't know what was happening. Officers mistaken thought he was having a mental health crisis and brought him to the Pacific Gateway Mental Hospital, despite the fact that he did not have mental illness. Hospital staff called 911 twice when Mejia tried to get out of his room and allegedly threatened them with a pencil. On April 1st, the first response was a crisis intervention team trained police officers that showed up and de-escalated the situation. The second time that he got out, hours later, two other officers showed up. Officer Bell, Jeffrey Bell, and Chris Davis confronted Mejia. They said that he grabbed the aluminum push rod off the door. Davis shot a less lethal weapon, and Bell fatally shot Mejia Pot. In the wake of the shooting, community members organized a series of forums that they presented a list of 10 demands to the city, the police, the county, and TriMet. The city responded with listening sessions. The listening sessions' good intentions were undone when the chief of police awarded the two police officers who shot Mejia Pot with medals the following year. Further, when people attempted to get the Citizens Police Review Committee to review the bidding case for possible misconduct, the director of the Independent Police Review and city auditor at the time shut them down. Eventually, this will lead to 5 of the 9 members of the CRC members quitting a few months later, among them a leading Chicano in our community. The hospital and the city each came up with monetary settlements with the Mejia Pot family. The hospital is now shut down. The city has agreed at the time to give 1-hour CIT training and training about epilepsy to all officers, as well as buying more kinds of less lethal weapons. A new policy has been developed to encourage officers to use their colleagues' language abilities or to get an interpreter to help when a person with limited English proficiency is the subject of a police encounter. It is hard to know whether this would have saved Mr. Mejia Port from his fate and how consistent this practice is now used. But here, where we stand now, today we continue to press for justice and change. Today, community demands to create a civilian police review board with real power will happen because of Portlanders who overwhelmingly voted for police accountability measure. And today, here and everywhere, people are calling for systems to root out white supremacy and for our leaders to have the courage to shape a new, better way forward. This is what Cesar Chavez did, MLK, and others dedicated their lives in service to justice. The least we can do to honor the lives that have been lost because these injustices still remain. The community will continue to do our part, continue pushing forward for substantive change, and police must also do their part in acknowledging their past harm on our communities. We ask you to engage our community and believe our experiences and create the policy changes that move the city forward. Portland can and must do better. We do hope that your actions as a council will lead us in that direction and address the unmet demands of 20 years ago and others for community engagement that continue to arise. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Martin, for your important words. Next, we have Edith Quiroz, Executive Director of El Programa Hispano.
Gracias, Commissioner Carmen Rubio. Good morning, council members, Mayor Wheeler, and Commissioner Hardesty. Thank you for the invitation this morning. I'm just taking in everything I'm hearing from these amazing leaders of the Latinx community. They're bringing up memories of the activism, the organizing that Portland has experienced for many years. And I've been reflecting back, and we do this on this day, on Cesar Chavez Day, the activism that these leaders have taken in our community. In my day job, I am the Executive Director of El Programa Hispano Católico. El Programa Hispano is a staple of the Oregon community, and its roots and legacy started with outreaching to migrant farm workers and the farm worker community in Oregon. And so we, for many years, have done this work. And I am also, like Reina, a daughter of immigrants. And I grew up in the Hood River Valley and the Dells, picking cherries and apples. But, I'm going to be honest with you, I wasn't really picking them. I was eating them and would end up every day with a tummy ache, eating all those wonderful cherries. But, I'd see my mom and dad work hard labor, and the conditions have not changed very much, as most of us have mentioned this morning. 2 years ago, El Programa Hispano, we go out and visit farm workers, and we do outreach. And we went to a local farm out in East Gresham. And I hadn't visited a farm in many years. And I was heartbroken to find out the living conditions of the local farm workers. There was a pregnant woman who was telling me that their bathrooms didn't really have running water. This is in 2019 when we went out to the farms. And it's just telling how much further we still need to go, how much advocacy we need to continue making so that these conditions improve. Having portable water, bathrooms was one of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and the movement in the 1960s. That was one of the main things that they advocated for. And to see that we still have farms here in Oregon not providing those adequate bathrooms to the farm workers, it's heartbreaking. And so this morning, as I was thinking about Cesar Chavez and and how do we honor and celebrate the life of one of our heroes, Cesar Chavez highlighted the depressed wages and inhumane working conditions experienced all these laborers in the 1960s. And his quest to bring dignity, respect, and humanity to American farm workers is something many of us will never forget. And as you have seen this morning, we have grown inspired by it. And we need to continue to be the voice for those who don't have a voice. That is our main mission. That is what we wake up every morning to do. The best way to honor his legacy for us and for you, for anyone that's listening, is to ensure the laws and policies that protect farm workers and their families are in place, that they are being overseen, honored, because that's the best way to continue to honor Cesar Chavez's legacy. Thank you to the City Council for honoring one of our heroes, because as Cesar Chavez often said during his course of his life, by honoring me, you are really honoring them. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Edith, and thank you for your work. Next, we have Tony DeFalco from Latino Network.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. And thank you, Commissioner Rubio, Commissioner Hardesty, for sponsoring this proclamation today. It is my unique honor and privilege to come before you today as the Executive Director of Latino Network, an organization that's been serving the Latinx community here in our region for the last 26 years. When I was thinking about honoring Cesar Chavez today, I thought about how he was a fighter. He was a fighter for fair wages. He was a fighter for livable working conditions for not just farm workers, but for our people. He fought for livable housing. He fought against the poisons, herbicides, and pesticides that harmed workers, our food, and our earth. We owe to Cesar some of the foundations of our Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and acts against pesticides and herbicides. He also fought for community self-determination, denied to Black and Brown people for hundreds of years. So when I thought about what you all can do today as a council, there are some very specific things that you can do to honor Cesar's legacy. First is by accelerating efforts to pay nonprofit workers who are taking care of our most vulnerable community members, by amending current city contracts to reflect a living wage, and including an annual COLA and wage escalator in those contract amendments and future contracts. I think, as you've heard this morning, farm workers are not confined to rural Oregon. They live right here. The sons and daughters of farm workers live right here. This is such an important part of our community that we call on you to honor all of our community. Second is you can aggressively address air quality in Portland to alleviate the suffering of low-income people and people of color who are disproportionately suffering the impacts of air toxins from diesel emissions. Especially during COVID, our community is getting the double whammy of both a respiratory illness and steady diesel emissions in our neighborhoods. You can do that by passing a strong ordinance that creates new staffing in the city to help our communities address and reduce toxic diesel pollution, and by creating resources for community organizations to address these toxic emissions in our communities. Third, you can increase investments in the joint office and into workforce and entrepreneurship programs to accelerate our pathways to making safe, stable housing a human right, and getting our Latinx community, who has been hardest hit by this pandemic, back to work building wealth in our communities. As we have built wealth, it has been wiped away with each successive crisis our community has faced. And it's time to create crisis-proof wealth building opportunities for our communities. And that requires investment in workforce, it requires investment in entrepreneurial opportunities and training. And the city has been committed to that, and we call on the city to increase its investment there. And last, we call on you to increase investment in community-based solutions to gun violence and moving toward a more multi-jurisdictional approach. Last night, like so many nights during this pandemic, I heard the sirens, dozens of sirens streaking through my neighborhood in Coley toward outer Northeast and into Southeast Portland. This pandemic and the violence associated with it represents the lack of investment in our communities, and our youth are struggling right now. And to be able to address that need, we need to triple down on our investment in community-based solutions to gun violence. And we appreciate the efforts of Commissioner Rubio, Commissioner Hardesty, and others who are articulating proposals for multi-jurisdictional approaches, increased investment in community partnerships. And we look forward to continued partnership with you all as you seek to craft those solutions. So I want to thank you all for this opportunity to share with you some of the things that you can do for the Latinx community right here, right now, to honor Cesar's legacy. And I ask you to be a fighter alongside us, as Cesar was for our community, for civil rights, for the human right to housing, for the human right to clean air, clean water, for the human right to live safely in our communities. These remain elusive to us, unjustly so. And we look forward to the day where we can stand together, breathe clean air, drink clean water, have solid wages, have safe and stable housing for our communities. Thank you, and si se puede.
Thank you so much, Tony, for your words. And I just want to thank all of our special guests for your wisdom and your voices and for all you do on behalf of our communities. And so now we'll turn it over to our other co-sponsor, Commissioner Hardesty, for some words, and then back to the mayor and our colleagues for final comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Rubio. Oh my gosh, thank you, Irina Lopez, Martin Gonzalez, Edith Quazaro, and Tony Del Falco. I feel like I've been on this generational journey this morning. Rena, you will always be a kid to me. I've known you for so long, but it's so fabulous to see that you are in your new position. And actually, it's not new anymore. You've been in it for a while. And what an incredible job that you're doing there. Martin, you and I spent a lot of time in marches and community meetings around police accountability. I cried with you when Mejia Put was killed unnecessarily in our community. I grieved with you when there was no action taken to address that unfair death. I got to tell you, I'm thrilled to know that you've also raised some activists that are very active and very engaged in community transformation. I just want to thank you for all you've done over the 30 plus years I've known you to really make sure that you're centering voices of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other communities of color. You have been a true champion, and I just want to acknowledge you because I don't get to see you anymore. It's great to see you today. And Tony, you and I have worked together for many years, and I am so grateful that you brought up the environmental justice issues, especially around honoring a great man like Cesar Chavez. Clearly, the health of farm workers was one of the core issues that he organized around. But I don't think a lot of people know that he was a Navy vet, as am I. He was a community organizer, as am I. He was a labor leader, as I'm not, but I could be if I wanted to be. But he worked well in actually engaging communities of color all across the spectrum, because he believed in justice for all of us, not just for one group, but for all. And it's really fascinating to me, the interconnectedness of the work that Cesar Chavez did with the work that Dr. Martin Luther King did, with the work that Malcolm X did. Clearly, our communities have been in these struggles for hundreds of years. And it breaks my heart to know that even today, when we know how necessary farm workers are to everybody else actually being able to eat, when the pandemic has shown us that the people who really are the most valuable people in our community are not the ones with the big titles, not the ones sitting in CEO office space, but actually the people who are growing our food, the people who are making it accessible for all of us. And we tend to forget that. But it is a legacy. It is a legacy of pride and our obligation to the people with the least voice. Commissioner Rubio, Commissioner Maps, and I are here because of the work that Cesar Chavez did over his lifetime. And I won't forget the shoulders that I stand on and the work that is still left for us to do. If it was easy, somebody would have done it a long time ago, right? It's not easy, but it's absolutely necessary and critical. We can no longer pretend that we are a progressive state, a progressive city, a progressive county, if we continue to ignore the inequities that are embedded in every single institution that we have. We know they're all interconnected, because if you don't have a clean, safe place to lay your head at night, you cannot be a productive worker. And the fact that farm workers still today cannot get overtime is insulting. It is absolutely insulting. All of us expect, except those of us on salary, that if we work more than 40 hours a week, we don't have to actually question that we're going to get overtime. That is not acceptable. But today we're celebrating a legacy of a fighter, a legacy of an organizer, a legacy of a uniter, as someone that looked at all of us as, you are my brother, you are my sister, and collectively we are in this together. And so thank all of you for your very powerful testimony. Thank you for the legacy that you are leaving as you continue to do the work that you're doing. And I will say that, as always, I am here with you 100%. And we will get this done because we have to. We have to get this done in this generation. Let's not leave this for our children or our grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, and thank you again to all of those who provided invited testimony. It was powerful. I obviously gave my remarks up front, so I won't take any more time at the microphone, but I would ask my other colleagues who've not had a chance to speak yet if they'd like to share any thoughts with all of us here today. Commissioner Maps, then Commissioner Ryan. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, colleagues, and hello to our distinguished guests. I'm delighted to join with you today to celebrate Cesar Chavez Day. Today, March 31st, as we have heard, would have been Chavez's 94th birthday, and the lessons of his life are more relevant today than ever. I grew up in the heyday of Mr. Chavez's career. I remember his marches, I remember his fasts, and I remember his organizing. And I continue to draw inspiration and lessons from his life and work. I admire, for example, Cesar Chavez's commitment to labor and to working people. I admire his commitment to racial equality, and I admire his commitment to nonviolent political action. Chavez used to talk about and speak of La Cosa, the cause. La Cosa was about more than a labor movement. It was about a new kind of politics, a politics that placed people at its center. And that should sound familiar to Portlanders and to this council, because that's the work we do in this city council, and that's the kind of work that we do in the city. In other words, we have all inherited the work started by Cesar Chavez, which is why it's such a pleasure for me today to celebrate Cesar Chavez Day. And let me close by saying, Viva la Cosa. Thank you.
Commissioner Ryan.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, oops. Sorry. You guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay.
You're good.
I'm having my own technical difficulty. Good morning. Thank you, first of all, Commissioner Rubio, for bringing this forward. I know it feels different this year because you're on the council, and it's also happy birthday to your grandmother. And thank you, Raina. Thank you, Martine. Thank you, Edith and Tony. And Martine, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you. We go back, and you were my first phone call when I was moving on from the school board. And I'm glad that we have that alumni status in common. And I just want to say the legacy of Cesar Chavez lives on with many of the greats, such as Martin Luther King and Gandhi, and their common mission was to bring dignity and opportunity to people. Chavez was a complex leader. He was admired by many for his strength and charisma, and his leadership progressed. So did his drive to bring people and different lived experiences and backgrounds to the movement. Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and other comrades of the United Farm Workers showed us the power of union. They taught us that when we unite, organize, and reach across aisles, there is nothing we can't accomplish. I also want to acknowledge my staff, who are Latinas. Kelly Torres, Chief of Staff, Senior Policy Manager Charity Montez, and my constituent person, Yesenia Carrillo, and my fiance, Amo Reyes. Today, I honor the life of Cesar Chavez and agricultural workers across the country who have been on the front lines of this pandemic, picking and harvesting the foods we eat. There's so much work ahead for us to protect them and our immigrant community members. Thank you for the testimony earlier. I'm with you, I stand with you, and I'm on your shoulders now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. And with that, it's my honor to read the proclamation on behalf of the Portland City Council. Whereas on March 31st, 1927, Cesar Estrada Chavez was born in his family's adobe home near Yuma, Arizona. During his childhood, Chavez and his family suffered injustice when they were swindled out of their home through a dishonorable business deal, learning in the process that the love for justice that is in us is not only the best part of our being, but it's also the most true to our nature. And whereas Cesar Chavez and his family continued to suffer injustice, becoming migrant farm workers and working in the fields up and down the San Joaquin Valley in California. Chavez dropped out of school after 8th grade when his father was injured in an accident and could no longer work. He then became a full-time farm worker himself. Whereas, after serving his country in the United States Navy, Cesar Chavez went to work in the lumber industry and again as a migrant farm worker. It was while working that he became friends with Father Donald McDowell, a Roman Catholic priest who introduced Chavez to union organizing and nonviolent teaching, and Fred Ross, a community organizer who hired Chavez as an organizer for the Community Service Organization to register voters. And whereas in 1962, Cesar Chavez founded the National Farm Workers Association with his wife, Helen Fabella, and Dolores Huerta, working to organize and provide services, including life insurance and a credit union, to improve the lives of migrant farm workers. And whereas on May 3rd, 1965, the National Farm Workers Association held its first strike with a group of rose grafters demanding increased wages. After 4 days, a wage increase was agreed upon and the strikers returned to work. And with the success of this strike, Cesar Chavez's reputation grew. And whereas in September 1965, Cesar Chavez and the National Farm Workers Association, which primarily consisted of Mexican farm workers, decided to back the Delano grape strike, which was initiated by the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, a group led by Larry Itliong and made up predominantly by by Filipino farm workers. Chavez, together with Itliong and Dolores Huerta, grew the strike and attracted national attention, leading to support from the United Auto Workers under Walter Reuther, the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, one of the main organizers of the civil rights movement, and then Senator Robert F. Kennedy, who held 3 congressional hearings on the plight of migrant farm workers and toured their places of work. And whereas the successful advocacy of both organizations together led to their consolidation as the United Farm Workers, the UFW, a union made stronger with the combined advocacy for both Mexican and Filipino farm workers, the UFW were able to grow their national support by leading a boycott against grapes and the grocery stores that continued to sell them. Eventually, the strike ended in 1970 with 26 growers signing contracts with the UFW, leading to increased wages, job benefits such as paid vacation days and health insurance, and improved working conditions. And whereas Cesar Chavez, a devout Roman Catholic who rarely missed Mass, combined union organizing and nonviolent teaching with Catholic social teaching to create a movement that not only was strategic in its efforts, but engaged in religious imagery, pilgrimages, prayer, fasting, and masses to meet the cultural and spiritual needs of people who struggled for better working conditions and, above all, a better life. And whereas Cesar Chavez continued to work after the Delano grape strike, leading further UFW strikes and expanding the UFW to other states, including the state of Oregon, and fought for better legal protections for migrant farm workers, leading to the passage of the California Agricultural Relations Act of 1975, which made California the first state in the country to enshrine the right to collective bargain for farm workers. Today, 10 states, including Oregon, have enshrined into law the right of farm workers to collectively bargain. And whereas, after his death on the 23rd of April, 1993 in Yuma, Arizona, Cesar Chavez remains a folk hero amongst Latinx Americans for his work meeting the needs of migrant farm workers in the San Joaquin Valley of California and elsewhere, while continuing to inspire labor and community organizers all around our country. Today, schools, libraries, parks, and streets are named after Cesar Chavez, including our own Cesar Chavez Boulevard, and many other places also celebrate Cesar Chavez on his birthday. Now, therefore, I, Ted Wheeler, Mayor of the City of Portland, Oregon, the City of Roses, do hereby proclaim March 31st, 2021 to be Cesar Chavez Day in Portland and encourage all residents to observe this day. Thank you for all of you good folks who provided testimony, to my colleagues. Thank you. This is a beautiful occasion. Keelan, we will now go back to, if I can find it, the time certain agenda, please. Item number 189.
Accept the 2020 annual report for the North and Northeast Neighborhood Housing Strategy Oversight Committee.
Commissioner Ryan, there we go. Good morning again.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Colleagues, last March, the North and Northeast Neighborhood Housing Strategy Oversight Committee was prepared to celebrate 5 years of the North-Northeast Housing Strategy. Unfortunately, due to COVID, that celebration was canceled, and we all look forward to being able to meet in person to celebrate the successes of the housing strategy. And in 2020, we lost many people, and one was an amazing community advocate, Dr. T. Allen Bethel. At this moment, let's just take a moment of silence for Dr. Bethel. Dr. Bethel was an original member of the Oversight Committee, and his dedication to the community and advocacy for doing that was right, and it was felt by all Portlanders for decades. So today we hear about year 6 of the housing strategy and what was accomplished by the Housing Bureau and their partners during an epidemic. We will also hear from Dr. Lisa Bates, Dr. Amy Thurber from Portland State University regarding the grant they received to continue their evaluation of the important North-Northeast preference policy. With that, I turn it over to Dr. Stephen Holt, Chair of the North and Northeast Oversight Committee. Please take it away, Dr. Holt.
Well, good morning, commissioners. For those of you who I've not had the opportunity to meet, I look forward to doing so. Commissioner Hardesty, always good to see you. Seems like we're seeing each other more frequently these days. And Mayor Wheeler, good to see you as well. An interesting day to be participating in presenting this particular report. Almost fortuitous, if not serendipitous, when we're talking about someone who has been so invested and so involved in righting wrongs and taking care of community. So good to be here today. 2020 was a year unlike any other. It stretched us as a people in ways that we did not realize we could be stretched. The cry for social upheaval, economic eruption, a health crisis, natural disasters caused us to examine things that really matter. We had to dig deep into our humanity and engage in thoughtful ways that we most likely would not have without the perfect storm. Sometimes crisis is necessary. Sometimes crisis is necessary to make us think, to make us reflect, to make us dig deep, to make us change and adjust. Sometimes crisis is necessary to highlight those things, bring to mind things that are in our sight lines the entire time, but we do not see without the right pressure. 2020 helped to highlight that. I'm amazed that in the year of 2020 for this Oversight Committee to continue to show up and do its work and invest in prioritizing what is a human right, a right for housing, a right for people to be in affordable housing, a right for people to be and have opportunities of home ownership, a right for people to have safe spaces and places to connect. I want to give significant appreciation to the Oversight Committee for their work, for their investment, for their tireless and relentless focus on this work. Thank you. Thanks each of you for doing this. I also want to say thanks to Mayor Wheeler, who for 4 years had the Housing Bureau and kept it as a priority and supported the work of the Oversight Committee, came to and was vocal in regard to his support for the work of the North-Northeast Oversight Committee. And I want to appreciate that, and your staff. And then I want to thank all of the other commissioners who are now weighing in, the new commissioners who are stepping into this seat to also prioritize this work. Thank you. I want to say thanks to the Portland Housing Bureau and Director Callahan, who has been at meeting after meeting after meeting to also be available and respond, not always in moments that have been soft and easy, but sometimes very intense and direct, as we've had to deal with making sure that the promises that were made are the promises that we keep. I'm excited about the report and what we have a chance to show you. 2020 was a miraculous year, and we'll get a chance to talk through that. Miss Leslie Goodlow is going to walk us through the presentation. You're going to get data in this report from 2015 to 2020. I've had the privilege of sitting as the chair for that entire time, and I will come back to talk about some of the opportunities that are in front of us. Again, a fortuitous day, almost serendipitous for what's in front of us and what we have to, in my mind, seize in order to keep this work going forward. So with that being stated, Ms. Goodlow, I put it in your hands.
Well, good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Leslie Goodlow. I'm the Equity and Business Operations Manager for the Housing Bureau, and I'm also one of the executive sponsors of the strategy, and I support the Oversight Committee. We are going to be presenting some data from 2020, and I'm going to go through this quickly. You all should have received this in your packets as well as the full report, but we will have opportunity to answer questions. So as these are the members of our oversight committee, we did lose Dr. Bethel. We were very sad with his passing. And then Dr. Karen Edwards resigned as she took on her new role for as the president of Clark College. We will be recruiting for 2 new members shortly to get us up to the full 13. Some of the accomplishments of 2020, Portland State received a Robert Wood Johnson grant to continue the evaluation of the preference policy. We're going to hear more about that. 3 of our multifamily rental projects completed construction and began lease up. Our PHB asset preservation pilot program served 21 households. And most spectacularly, we went from 32 preference policy families becoming homeowners to 65 in 2020. This map shows you where the investments have been made in Northeast Portland through the housing strategy. The red orange dots are rental properties. The 2 green dots are home ownership developments that are, one of them is almost fully leased, or not leased, I'm sorry, sold. The other one is pretty close to being sold. And then the third part of Kilpatrick or Kenton Commons is not quite finished with construction, but we have people in line to purchase those. And then the blue dots are our land bank properties. So this slide shows the number of people that received home repair grants or loans over the course of the housing strategy in 2020. We were able to serve 18 families with home repair loans and 82 families with home repair grants. This slide shows you the race, ethnicity breakdown by year of the families that we've served with both home repair grants and home repair loans.
Commissioner Hardesty, your hand's up. Do you want to ask now?
Yeah. Yes, please. Leslie, if you could go back 2 slides, please.
2 slides?
Yes, not this one. Thank you.
Okay.
So when we do home repairs, are we still putting a lien on property or for these homeowners of 25 years?
No, ma'am. We are now doing, we have updated the guidelines for 15 years for home repair loan, and then they're forgivable after 15 years.
Thank you. Is that a recent policy change?
It's within the last couple years, and we are currently going through all of our loan product loans and updating that for people that have had previous home repair loans. So it's not just current going forward. We are going back and updating the loan docs for everyone.
Good, because I still think 15 years is too long. What's the reason for the 15 years?
I'm not as versed with the program, but I will get you an answer to that question.
Thank you, because I've had some constituents asked about getting a home repair loan, and then there's a lien on their property for 25 to 30 years, and I think that's really inappropriate. I think the desire was to make sure people weren't getting a repair and selling their house. But if we are trying to keep people in their homes, putting a long lien on it, I think it's kind of something we should talk about.
Yes, ma'am. I agree with you totally.
Thank you.
All right. So preventing displacement, we provided care. We used the CARES money that we received to provide assistance to homeowners. We had 17 families that had received home repair loans get CARES financial assistance. That assistance averaged about $4,200 per household, and 71% of those families were Black or African American. We had 27 families that have received down payment assistance loans from the Housing Bureau, received CARES mortgage assistance, and that averaged $4,900 per household. with 96% of them being Black or African American. Our asset preservation pilot program that started just as COVID was taking off, we had a very successful start to the pilot. We have exceeded the goal for estate planning webinars for the number of attendees that we were expecting to get, and we've not quite reached the goal of the number of program participants that we are planning to have, but this pilot goes through October. And as you can see, 86% of the participants have been Black or African American. So we're reaching the desired audience for that asset preservation pilot. Creating new homeowners. We, at this slide shows the number of people by funding source that have become homeowners through the housing strategy. But the slide that I'm most proud of, or the goal, are this chart on the right-hand side to show that we almost doubled our number of homeowners from 2019 to 2020. It's we have come a long way in the since 2018 and 2017 when we had none, and 2018 where we only had 7. So very excited about the fact that even during the pandemic, we were able to create new homeowners. This is some of the information on our creating new homeowners. The number of Black African-American folks, 91% of the people that have become homeowners are our target population, but primarily people of color are participating in the program. The other piece of this is the number of people with lower AMIs that have become homeowners. 25% of the people have a 0 to 60% AMI. We have 43% are at 61 to 80%. We have 23% are from 81 to 100%, and then 9% are from 101 to 120%. So we've been able to serve some very low to moderate income folks to become homeowners through this program that likely would not have been able to become homeowners without it. These are some pictures of some of our new homeowners from 2020 moving into their new houses. One from our project on Olin, and then 3 people moving into PCRI Blandina Townhome. So they're very excited for them. Our strategy 3 is creating rental homes. And as I stated earlier, we had 3 projects come online and start leasing in 2020. 2, so PCRI's King Parks is 100% leased. And as of, these statistics are as of the end of December. Bridges Songbird was about 60% leased at that time. And Renaissance Commons was about 50% leased at the end of December. This is a slide that we used last year, but I know we have new commissioners. So I put it in here so that you know that we have exceeded our goal in rental units. Our goal was 380 and we have 501. We're able to serve very low income families through a combination of Section 8 and permanent supportive housing. 52% of the units are family size with 2 or more bedrooms. And we're going to be able to serve over 1,200 people in the 500 units. Land banking, as on the map, I showed you those locations. The strong family property, we plan to develop utilizing the additional funds that were approved through maximizing indebtedness. We plan to have a community engagement process to talk to the community about what should go on that piece of property. The Cary Boulevard property that we purchased from the Water Bureau, was brought into the district just over a year ago, or no, almost 2 years ago now at this point. And we will utilize the funds from the maximum indebtedness to create a home ownership community on that property. And then the third piece is our 5020 North Interstate, which was going to be a condo project that, due to the pandemic and the financial crisis, that project was not able to go forward. And that property is planned to be included in our Metro bond solicitation. We will be hopefully utilizing the plans that were developed through Proud Ground and their partners to turn that project into a rental property. These are some of the DMW ESB stats for from 2017 through 2020 for both our home repair loans and grant program. For our rental construction, I wanted to highlight that 2 new data points that we are now receiving are gender, workforce hours, and apprentice hours. So we're now able to see how women are being included in construction. And we have increased the number of hours of participation from 3.2% in 17-18 to 25% in 2021. So a very significant increase there. Our race and ethnicity participation by for rental projects, and for apprentices, and for journey level. These are both also new data points that we're now tracking so that we can ensure that our contractors and our providers are utilizing apprentice programs to bring people into the fields of construction.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Leslie, I was curious, if we seem to be losing African-American contractors rapidly, why is that?
I'm going to have to get that question answered. I don't manage this, so we will get you an answer for that question later this week, if that's okay.
That'd be fine. Thank you.
Okay. So we did 1 round of the preference policy in 2020. It started just before the shutdown. We had just over 1,700 applicants apply for preference in 2020. And one other piece of information about the preference policy, we've had just about 5,700 people unduplicated apply from for the preference policy through all rounds. So we're finding that people are still wanting to move into Northeast Portland and are very interested in both the homeownership opportunities and the rental properties. I will turn this now back over to Dr. Holt to talk about the summary and the conclusions from the year.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hold on the summary. I will keep my comments held until the end of our time, but I would like to hear from Dr. Bates and Dr. Thurber and give them the opportunity to share what they found out related to the preference policy. Dr. Bates.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Holt. Hi, good morning, everyone. Dr. Thurber had to go to class. We started our spring term this week, so she's had to step off. Thank you for having me. So I think last year's annual report, we shared kind of our big picture summary of what we had been finding in the first initial preference policy buildings. But for the new commissioners, I'll share that our research has been really focused on the well-being and experiences of folks who have been able to move back to or to more stable housing in Northeast Portland through the preference policy. So we conducted surveys, interviews, and focus groups with the first 3 buildings that were occupied under the preference policy, and generally found that folks were having very positive experiences in terms of their sense of community, their sense of connection to place, their own family history and community history, their networks that were still in the neighborhood. We did find some challenges for folks. I think we've talked before in these sessions about access to things like affordable groceries and issues of perhaps experiences of discrimination or some social conflict in the neighborhood that are race and class related. But overall, people describe their experience of living in Northeast, particularly for those returning from other parts of the city, as very positive, both perceptually, their feelings, and also their experiences of things like access to their jobs and transit, and the material kind of resources around them in Northeast in terms of things like parks and transit, et cetera. So as Ms. Leslie shared, our team was awarded a research grant from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation as part of their Policies for Action work group. It is a program that seeks to support knowledge, research, and evaluation of state and local policies, housing policies that improve health, a culture of health and well-being, which is Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's kind of primary interest, that support racial equity. So we are part of a cohort of projects that look at ways that local governments are acting to reduce racial segregation, increase access to opportunity, and place-based resources for people of color. So I think that the project award shows how much interest there is nationally about this policy and the excitement. There are a number of other cities that are beginning a policy making process to create their own preference policies. We know that San Francisco and Austin, Texas already have policies modeled similarly on Portland's, but there are other cities that are considering this as a tool to address displacement and intergenerational traumas, really, and root shock from the experience of policy-led displacement. But I think, more importantly for us at PSU, our motto is let knowledge serve the city, and we're very much committed to our ongoing partnership with PHB. We've had really great participation from all of the housing providers in terms of supporting access to residents and community spaces for holding events. And we will be in this further project, we'll be adding a community advisory board that will help us to not only interpret our findings, but also to lift up the voices of people who are living in the buildings about their ideas and concepts for how they would like to see community develop in their buildings and in their neighborhoods. We heard a lot about that last year. Really great ideas, from block parties and kind of welcoming events to ways that folks could participate in neighborhood associations, as an example. And we'll also be surveying folks who are on the wait list and have not yet moved in, so that we are able to get a broader picture of how people are experiencing other parts of the city as well. So we'll have a comparison in terms of health, well-being, and access to resources for folks who have been impacted by intergenerational displacement. So really looking forward and appreciating that partnership.
Thank you, Dr. Bates. Super excited about, and congratulations again on the award, and super excited about what it will mean, especially since we're on the cutting edge of this work. What a great privilege to participate, and great thoughts around and strategy around how to broaden that base and capture the right kinds of information so it can help to enhance the work we're doing. I appreciate that. We also are privileged to have some homeowners, or at least a homeowner, to talk about their experience as a result of this work. And Ms. Goodlow, I'm going to hand it back to you to share that, to introduce the homeowner, and then also to read the response from the other. Thank you.
You're on mute, Lisa. Leslie, sorry. Leslie, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was trying to get myself off mute. Yes, we have Sandra Wadsworth, who has participated in the asset preservation pilot and has received home repair dollars from PHB. So Sandra, if you would like to unmute and give your statement.
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning to Mayor Willer and commissioners. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
loud and clear.
Okay. My name is Sandra Wadsworth. I'm a homeowner in Northeast Portland. I want to thank Dana Shepard for the opportunity to speak about my experience with the Portland Housing Bureau. My parents purchased our home about 55 years ago in the Irvington district when I was about 7 years old. They both are gone now, but they asked us children to never sell the family legacy home. After moving back into the home about 5 years ago, I knew we needed some home repairs. And someone recommended the home repair loan through the Portland Housing Bureau. I did qualify and received a loan and was able to have new windows put in throughout the entire home, update plumbing, wiring, and much more work that was necessary. Also, I want to thank the team that I worked with at Portland Housing Bureau, Bev, Molly, and Dana, because they made the process very easy. Also, Portland Housing Bureau has partnered with African American Alliance for Home Ownership, and I was able to have an estate planning done for my children to protect our family legacy. I want to thank the wonderful lady named Miss Etta Baker and her team. And I'm very grateful for these programs and hope that the city continue to provide the support to our community so that we can maintain and stay in our homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra. We appreciate you joining us today. I do have a statement from one of our down payment assistance home buyers. His name is Nate Carter. He was unable to attend today, but he wanted to make sure his statement was read into the record. The DPAL program was life-changing for my family and I. Given the unaffordable housing market in Portland, the DPAL loan made the dream of home ownership become a reality. As a first-time home buyer that had limited knowledge around the home buying process, I can say that I felt comfortable throughout the whole process. At every step of the way, there was a culturally specific specialist that was available to handhold and answer any and all questions I had. They helped me budget properly, increase my credit score, and find a trusted lender and agent. During closing, the housing center provided an inspector to view the house and walk me through the possible repairs that needed to be done and how to negotiate it into closing. After purchase, the housing specialist periodically reach out to check in on any needs that I might have. Overall, the whole process was fantastic, and I'm very grateful that the DPAL grant is available to people like me.
Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing that. Excited to be able to participate in the process. Thank you, Sandra, for coming today and to give us live feedback on the practices of the policies and how they're impacting. We appreciate that. You see in front of you the summary, and I'm not going to read through all of it. We've had an opportunity to review it. I will say thanks again to City Council and Portland Public Schools, Multnomah County Metro, Portland Housing Bureau, Prosper Portland for moving forward and maximizing indebtedness to increase these opportunities. We know that housing, again, is a human right, and it continues to be one of those evasive and elusive things that's happening in our community. If ever there were a need for us to be strategic and important and prioritize this work, it's now. And so I think we're all clear on that. We talked about 50-20 and the transition of that. And there are two things I do want to highlight in the summary briefly. And that is there continues to be this need of affordable housing, just mentioned. And it places demand on us to be very creative very intentional with how we do that. And my thought is affordable housing is not only a human right, it is something that should be woven into the fabric of society, fabric of neighborhoods, so that it isn't isolated. We don't create communities or corridors of poverty. It's a great way to normalize and naturalize the lived experience. And it's a part of all of us, and not to relegate it to portions or spaces. So it's important, again, for us to think about it geographically. I do need to highlight that there have been some leasing challenges, and there are challenges with 2 of the 3 facilities that have come online. And part of it is in relationship to for BIPOC community, that the participants, that those who are going through the leasing process need to be thoughtful in regard to who those people are that are doing the process, that they look like the individuals who are coming and applying to the spaces. And so it's a great learned opportunity and a great opportunity to expand and enhance for these nonprofit partners how to do work, and to do work in a 21st century way, and to do it currently. But I want to spend the majority of my time on the opportunity. So if you, whoever's running it, thank you. I will start with the last bullet point and talk about the Oversight Committee is supporting a package for $300,000 to continue to provide stable and ongoing funding for the administration of the preference policy. You heard about the preference policy and how significant it is and how important it is and what it's doing. In order for this work to go forward, there is a need to underwrite it so that it can be staffed appropriately. And since these places are going to be affordable for 99 years, there needs to be ongoing effort and focus as people move out and graduate and hopefully improve their living experience by having stable housing. And others are moving in, someone will need to facilitate that process. Well, the Oversight Committee 100% supports this and has led the charge so that it can happen. The next bullet point and opportunity is, and was talked about briefly, and that's the community engagement that's planned for the 2 land bank properties. I do need to say this in regard to community engagement. We have been doing community engagement in a host of arenas for years. And to a great degree, we have a very clear understanding of what the Black community continues to highlight as priorities. Safe spaces, spaces to gather, arts space, museum space, affordable housing, ownership and rental, small business incubation and business opportunities. We are clear on what we know. And so while we will be involved in robust community engagement with how the housing is to be delivered, we understand the priority of it. And the last opportunity, and I think it's almost the most central one, Commissioner Hardesty, we agree with you 100% in regard to the years of the 15-year forgiveness around home loans. That was actually put forward by Dr. Bethel. It was led by him, introduced by him, and then rallied by the Oversight Committee. We are in full support of reducing that amount of time as possible, and whatever it would take in order for that to happen. We are also concerned in regard to the diminishing amount of African Americans who are in this space and doing some of this work and interested in understanding it. To that extent, I want to highlight what I would say is almost a mandate on us to coordinate our efforts. We're living in an unprecedented time. There are over $1 billion, potentially $3.5 billion that are being invested into the Portland community right now. Through the I-5 expansion, through Williams and Russell, through the community development initiatives, Oversight Committee out of Prosper Portland, what's going on with Metro Bond, housing opportunities. We have an ability to deliver on the promises we've made. No one of these projects can do it on their own, but collectively, we can do it together. Add into that Albina Vision Trust, add into that the Interstate Bridge replacement, add into that Reimagine Oregon, and there is so much opportunity in front of us. I would say that the responsibility of those of us who are committed to this work places a demand for us to think beyond our own boundaries, jurisdictions, historic issues, and think about how do we benefit people. I said at the beginning of this meeting that this was fortuitous. Here we are talking about the championship work of Cesar Chavez and how he's prioritized a people and a people impacted. You know this. We, for Black people in the nation, but specifically in the Portland area, we're at the bottom of the rung in every area, in every category examined, the bottom of the rung. The home ownership numbers are worse than they were in the mid-60s. We've got an opportunity to do something phenomenal and incredible. This is a great report, and I celebrate it. And it's great for us to pause and praise, but we can't get stuck in our pause or in our praise because of the work that's in front of us. My urge to you, and many of you have received my email from Friday, it's already in this report. My urge to you and my request is that we think collectively together with how we can make a difference for those who desperately need our effort, our energy, and our influence. That's our report. I'd love to hear your questions and take feedback.
Very good. Colleagues, any further questions? Looks like Commissioner Hardesty has a question.
Thank you. Thank you all for that very detailed report. Am I to understand that but for the CARES Act dollars, there would have been no dollars available for home repairs?
Oh, no, we have a home repair program that the CARES money went to support helping people pay their mortgages, that it was to pay mortgage or pay their utilities, not to do the home repairs.
Oh,
so
I see.
We targeted our clients that had received home repair loans and down payment assistance first to get the mortgage assistance that we had available through the CARES money.
Thank you. That was helpful because I would have had another question if your answer had been different. Thank you for that. I appreciate the fact that you are gathering information demographically, but as I pointed out earlier around who is getting the work to build these homes, who is getting the opportunity to build their own economic power, there appears to be a shift that's happening that is unexplained from what was relatively okay to bad when it comes to African American contractors. And so I am curious as to what strategies will be developed to ensure that the preference policy actually benefits African American and other people of color contractors, because if we continue the trend that we're on, once again, we won't get any of the jobs.
I can speculate, and I agree with you 100%, Commissioner Hardesty. My speculation based in the environments that I'm in is with some of the two things. It's the amount of people, African Americans, who are going into the space and the recruiting and the strategy to recruit and how it's being prioritized. Extensive conversations with Nate McCoy of NAMAC and a few others that I could name. It is a major concern and will require some significant prioritization and potential funding for that work. But
we already put a lot of funding into that work. I'm just curious as to why we're Black and brown people are benefiting from the construction opportunities, right? So it's not that we're not putting the dollars in, it's just who benefits from those dollars. So I appreciate that. What is a certified and self-reported MBE? How does somebody self-report MBE?
Director Callahan, do you want to respond to that?
Commissioner, may I ask what area?
I'm looking at slide 19, where we have the demographics breakdown around certified firms. It says certified MBEs, certified and self-reporting MBEs. And so I'm just trying to figure out what a self-appointed MBE is, or a self-reported MBE is.
Let me look into that. I'm sorry, I don't have the PowerPoint in front of me, but let me look into that and get back to you on that.
because I bring that up because the self-reporting numbers are significantly higher than the certified MBEs. So I just want to unpack that a bit and get some specific information. So I'll start with questions and just saying it's incredible from when I first got to City Council in 2019, the number of home ownership units that were possible, as well as affordable apartment units. And it is good to see the progress. I guess my question is, when is this process over? Because I thought this was a temporary oversight committee that was going to do some work, and then it was going to be gone, and then it's going to do the work, it was going to be done. And now it feels like there's this mission creep that now we're going to do everything for Inner Northeast. And I'm just kind of curious as to what the timeline is for what was originally the charge, because it sounds like the charge has changed, to where you think, how far in the future are you anticipating this work happening?
Great question. So let me address the mission creep. The mission creep, there's no change in charter. There's no change in charge related to the oversight committee. My last comments were in reflection of a greater passion that I have for the work that we're doing in the city and the broader reach and the opportunity to address what has been articulated repeatedly by the Black community about what their needs are and their hopes and their wishes are, and wanting to capture the fact that we've got billions of dollars being invested into the city. And so as a community leader, a community member, I think it's a responsibility for someone to highlight and to call to accountability or call to investment the opportunity that's in front of us. And so that's not reflective of the oversight committee specifically. So thank you. And then the timeline, Leslie, I believe you were going to address that.
Yeah, so the original timeline for the housing strategy was 5 years for that $20 million. But as we have increased the available funding and moved funding under the strategy umbrella, so we have moved all of our interstate TIP dollars under the umbrella of the housing strategy. It has increased the amount of time that the oversight committee will be in operation. So now we're probably looking at another 3 years while we expend the dollars from the maximum indebtedness while those projects get underway and get leased. And then once that happens, then we can, do we need an oversight committee for Northeast Portland? I think the Housing Bureau and the Housing Commissioner can talk about the necessity of that committee, or maybe it gets rolled into some of the other committees that are working in Northeast Portland, or be a subcommittee or subgroup. But at this point, we're looking at probably another 3 years while we get through those additional projects.
Thank you very much. And then thank you, Dr. Holt, for the clarification, because I didn't want to bifurcate all the efforts that are going on. I didn't want to leave this conversation thinking that all the other activities that are going on are, thanks for the clarification. It was helpful. And
thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Very, very good. Next up, we have Commissioner Ryan, and then colleagues. We're running pretty far behind schedule. So maybe after Commissioner Ryan, unless somebody has a burning question, I'll entertain a motion to accept the report. Commissioner Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, the Housing Bureau and Dr. Holt for that presentation. I have a question. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge the dialogue that just took place. I heard you, Dr. Holt, about the collective efforts, and I think that's part of what you were alluding to with how we knit this together and with greater efficiency and, more importantly, impact. Speaking of impact, congratulations, Leslie Goodlow. Doubling the amount of homeowners in 1 year is a big deal. Can you please, when you look at data that has spikes, you want to know what practices were behind that so we can understand it, so we can support that. Can you please explain what was new and different in the past year?
Well, I'll jump in real quick. I don't think that there was anything new or different. It just took people time to get through the process. We're finding that it's taking people about 2 years from when they start thinking about becoming a homeowner to when they actually get their keys. And so that's where we just had quite a few people get to that point in 2020 and find a home that they could afford and be able to get a mortgage during a pandemic, during a financial crisis. So that number is so much more significant probably than the other people, not to put anything down on those, but that we got, 32 people become homeowners during a pandemic and a financial crisis is amazing.
Yes, it is. Dr. Hall, did you?
Let me just add to that. These are people who've been in the process for quite some time. And so we talk about how long it took. It's because of how far back people were starting. It's the economic impact from where people started. We cannot ignore that we're talking about the people who've been most impacted, most marginalized in our city. And so the time taken is the time it takes to help somebody get up who's been so far down. So the credit repair, the economy and building up revenue and all of that. And so we need to capture that as well.
I appreciate that. And I think in addition to that, anyone that's built anything, no matter what sector you're in, there's an acceleration. And so it takes a few years to get things built up and then it starts to accelerate. And sometimes the public is very, very impatient with investments and they want it to happen overnight. So I also wanted to use this time to have that type of dialogue. And I thought I might hear some of what I heard from both of you. So thank you. And really want to acknowledge the testimony from Ms. Sandra Wadsworth. That was really compelling. And my last question to the Housing Bureau is, what's our ongoing support? So my lived experience taught me that once you're in a home, you need some support after that. So is there direct support for those that now are homeowners? Is that part of the services that we provide? Maybe I missed that.
Commissioner Ryan, Shannon Callahan, the various entities that we work with that have helped create these homeowners, so Habitat for Humanity, Proud Ground, PCRI, all maintain a connection to these homeowners. And I wouldn't say that there's ongoing necessarily services, but as you can see with the CARES mortgage assistance we had when a crisis occurred, we were fortunate enough that council had prioritized some of that funding. And then those partners worked to stabilize those families during the pandemic. But we don't necessarily provide intensive services to homeowners in the same way that we might in a rental building. But all of our partners maintain connections to their homeowners and help them weather financial crises as they come. They're all committed to their long-term stability of the homeowners. And then of course, if there's other supports or services they need, those would be met by other community-based partners that they would be referred to. Did that answer your question, Commissioner?
It did, and also it's my job to, of course, have this dialogue and to continue to dig into this with you because, we want to have data that shows that, 4 years later, they're doing really well financially and they're building their capital and their equity because it's a long game. And too often, I think the finish line is actually further along and we just have to keep the ongoing support. So I just want to put that out. Thank you very much. I heard what you said, Mayor. I'll stop.
No, it's a great conversation. I'm just mindful that we have a full agenda and people waiting to testify. So I will entertain a motion to accept the report.
I accept. I move.
Commissioner Ryan moves the report. Commissioner Hardesty seconds the report. Any further discussion? Elin, please call the roll.
Rubio.
I just want to really appreciate the volunteer committee members that took the time to hold our work to a high level of integrity by ensuring it centers community and communities that are most impacted by generations of disinvestment and displacement. I'm also really excited by the results and the promise that this signifies. And I also want to acknowledge what I heard today and recognize that we still have so much more to do to get to a place beyond recognition and deeper into actionable resource solutions that both include strengthening housing, but also goes beyond housing to ensure experiences of belonging and well-being, wealth creation, and economic opportunities in the Black community. So I'm, for one, interested in exploring with my colleagues what it will take to continue that preference policy that was referenced, and also look forward to updates about how these programs continue to develop and strengthen the community over time. I vote aye.
Ryan.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a great report. I had an opportunity to do a little bit of dialogue earlier, just a big congratulations and thank you for your long-term service. Dr. Holt, we really appreciate it. And this is a longer conversation. I'm in for the long haul, and I look forward to continuing dialogue. And I'll see you all this evening. Thank you. I vote aye. There's that part.
A minor detail, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you all. I am really grateful for the information. It's clear that we still have a lot of work to do in Northeast. We have a lot of work to do in East Portland. We have a lot of work to do in West Portland. We got a lot of work to do as a city. But I am also I want to thank Dr. Bates because building community matters. And it's not just enough to have a place to live that you can afford to live in. But if you don't have cultural supports around you, then you are just a visitor in your own community. So I do think it's the cultural experience, the acceptance of being in a community that's radically changed is still a question that is unanswered. And I look forward to the work that Dr. Bates will be doing to help us answer that question with more clarity. I'm happy to vote aye.
Maps?
I'd just like to thank the Oversight Committee for their very thorough work. This is a really encouraging project. I'm happy to vote aye.
Wheeler?
Well, I certainly want to thank Dr. Holt. I want to thank the Oversight Committee as well. I want to thank Shannon Callahan and the Housing Bureau. I want to thank Commissioner Ryan for his latest stewardship of the Housing Bureau and the Northeast Housing Strategy. But I especially want to thank the folks who testified today. And let's go into the Wayback Machine for just a moment. This idea originally was conceived of by Commissioner Dan Saltzman when he was the commissioner in charge of housing. And the idea of a preference policy was at the time a radical idea. And it took a lot of time and energy for the then city commissioners and the Housing Bureau and the Oversight Committee to really get their legs underneath them in terms of how this was going to work. And when I joined the council over 4 years ago, I can honestly tell you all, it didn't look like it was going to work very well. There was a lot of good intention behind it. There was a lot of passion behind it. There were tremendous community volunteers and partners who are literally just giving their all to make this work. But for those of you who remember the city council session when we heard our report some number of years ago, it didn't go well. And the city council just uniformly was disappointed with the results. I think at the time, Stephen, maybe you remember, I think we had 3 families that had actually secured housing on the list, and that was 2 years into the policy. And we could have pulled back at that time. That, you know, politically, that would have been the easy thing to do, is just say, okay, we tried it, dead end, it isn't going to work. But that's not where the Oversight Committee wanted to go. That's not where you wanted to go, Dr. Holt. That's not where the city council wanted to go. There were important values and commitments to the community that were behind not only the preference policy, but the broader Northeast housing strategy. And we were all determined that in total, all of these strategies would be successful. And so we spent a lot of time in this virtual chamber beating up on ourselves and beating up on things that aren't going the way we want them to go. And to be honest with you, that's most things, because the issues that we grapple with in this virtual chamber are some of the most complex and interrelated social issues confronting our society at this time. And so sometimes we dupe ourselves into believing that strategies are short-term, when in fact, we are changing and realigning entire systems, particularly in this case, those that support and uplift populations who are struggling the most for a wide variety of reasons. Economics is just part of it. And so I want to acknowledge the improvements that have been made and the tangible progress that has been made, and the leadership that all of you have provided in order to make that so. We don't oftentimes take the time to say, look, we've got a long way to go, but let's look at the path we just walked and take the moment to look back on how steep and how rocky that path was and use where we are today. It's not, as the old saying goes, we're not there yet, but we're pretty darn far up the trail. And it shows that we are making progress and we are gaining higher altitude and we are living up to the core values behind the Northeast housing strategy. The community is engaging, I would argue, better than anybody had originally anticipated that the community would engage and help lead this effort. So there's a lot for us to take stock of today and be proud of today, while we acknowledge that there's still a considerable amount of the path ahead. So I just want to thank all of you. I don't think we stop often enough to just say thanks. You're doing a great job. Well done. Pat yourselves on the back because you deserve it. I vote aye. The report's accepted, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in the months and perhaps the years ahead. Thank you all. Next up, time certain for 10:30. We're obviously behind that. Item 190, please.
Amend provisions of City Building Code to clarify permit abandonment, expiration, extensions, and reactivation.
Commissioner Ryan.
Yes, here we go. Thank you, Mayor. So when a person submits an application for a building permit, they're expected to get the permit issued and the project completed within a certain timeline. This ordinance clarifies when BDS will extend permit applications, issued permits, and other issues related to the life of the permit to be consistent with the current state codes, BDS practices, and the adopted program guide for the life of the permit. In addition, there are also federally imposed deadlines for BDS to process permits for cell phone infrastructure, which are very tight, in most cases 60 days. This ordinance then will amend the city code chapters for building, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and sign permits to clarify when those permits will be considered abandoned or expired and the criteria for extending, voiding, or reactivating those permits. With that, I turn it over to Emily Sandy and Nancy Thornton for the Bureau of Development Services to provide more information and answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryan. Good morning, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Emily Sandy. I'm a Code and Policy Analyst with the Bureau of Development Services. As Commissioner mentioned, I'm here with my colleague Nancy Thornton to present this ordinance. The ordinance applies generally to the permits that Commissioner Ryan described, and I'll cover a little bit of background about that. But there are also some more specific amendments, in particular for personal wireless facilities that Nancy will cover. And I'm going to move to share my screen. All right, before we move on to describing the amendments, here's some grounding information on what the life cycle of a permit looks like. In this diagram, as you move from left to right, you move through the different phases of a permit. As you move from top to bottom, you move through the number of days in each phase. In the big picture, there are two stages: when permits are under review, but they haven't been issued, and then after the permit is issued. On this diagram, it shows more detailed phases as the permit moves along. Both while the permit is under review and after the permit is issued, permits can remain active for as long as the applicant continues to participate in the review or inspection process without a gap of 180 days. If applicants don't respond to requests for corrections or additional materials from staff while the permit is under review, the permit is abandoned. For issued permits, if applicants don't have an approved inspection within 180 days, the permit expires. However, if applicants anticipate that they cannot meet these timelines, they can request an extension. However, an abandoned or expired permit is not the end of the permit life cycle. After a permit is abandoned or expired, there is another 180-day period where an applicant can request the permit to be reactivated. If that 180-day period is completed, the permit becomes void. To some, without extensions or reactivations, a permit is void after a total of 360 days of inactivity by the applicant. And a note that state building code gives authority to the building official who's housed in BDS to extend or reactivate a permit with justifiable cause. To be transparent, BDS has issued a program guide that clarifies expectations and circumstances under which BDS will extend or reactivate permits. This program guide was last substantially updated in 2019. For all the permits, the non-personal wireless related permits, a lot of the amendments are just cleanup and clarification. It separates the code requirements for permit applications, permits under review, and then permits that have been issued. It also decouples requirements for abandoned or expired permits versus void permits. The substantive changes are we're removing a limit of one extension, allowing the possibility of more than one extension. It allows BDS and applicants to consider more factors and circumstances when determining whether to extend a permit. It also removes specific fee requirements. Fees, including those for extensions and reactivations, are in the BDS fee schedule, which is adopted by City Council annually. And now I will turn it over to Nancy to talk about permits for personal wireless facilities.
Thanks, Emily. Good morning, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Nancy Thornton. I'm also a code and policy analyst with the Bureau of Development Services. I'm just going to talk about the wireless part of this. So by way of background, the wireless industry complained to the FCC a few years ago that local jurisdictions weren't getting their wireless permits issued fast enough. So the FCC in response adopted some rules that now requires cities to get these permits issued within a really condensed timeline, and those are known as shot clocks. So I don't expect you to look through the details of this, but this gives you an outline of the types of shot clocks that we have. Most of ours fall within the two that are labeled the 60-day periods, the 609s and the small wireless facilities on existing facilities. But in addition to these shot clocks, the latest FCC rules now require us to accept permit applications for projects like swapping out equipment on existing towers as soon as the applicant submits their paperwork. And these are the 6409s, and that's about 80% of the permits that we take in. This is significant because we normally don't take in multiple open permits on a site so that we can make sure that the site is, that it's all the requirements are satisfied. So in this case, if we take in a 6409 permit, there may be structural impacts, for example. So you could have a tower that has, existing equipment on it, and somebody comes in and they want to put new equipment, and that'll bring the capacity of that tower, say, up to 80% capacity. And then you could have, subsequent carriers come in and they can't exceed that extra 8%, or the structure basically will fail. And part of the issue that we're trying to address is that our records show that a lot of times the wireless contractors will sit on their applications for months or even a year or more before they move them through the system. And so to keep that life cycle going, then we need to move along the life of the permit. So Emily, if you can move to the next slide, that would be great. So this is basically just a little bit different, and I know you don't have time to look at this in detail, but basically what we're doing is specifically for the wireless permits, we are going to move to a system where they don't get automatic extensions, and they will have to get their permits moving in each of the two main cycles that Emily described, going from getting issued and then getting the project actually finished to 180 calendar days in each of those categories. So, and then we won't reactivate them if they become void. Right now, we're working on a separate program guide, which is basically, outlining the program for processing the wireless permits. That's going to talk about how the extensions will be granted. Mainly what we're looking for in these wireless situations is having them be able to articulate to us, why do you need the extension and how long, so that it doesn't sit out there. Because one of the problems that we had traditionally, we had literally hundreds of permits, wireless permits sitting out there where we didn't even know if they built it, what was on the site, and because they never finalized it, and then they would come in for a subsequent permit on the same site, and we didn't know it was out there. So the carriers have raised some concerns that our ability to grant the extensions are a little too discretionary. But as Emily mentioned, under the state building code, the building official does actually have that discretion. But in addition to that, we are developing specific criteria for the wireless permits. And we also have an internal and external appeal process. So if we deny an extension, they can appeal to our internal administrative appeals board. If they don't like that decision, they can then, appeal it to our external board and on up. So basically, there is a process for them if they have an issue. And I'd also like to point out, it's in everybody's best interest to get these things finished, these projects finished. We're not trying to hold them up. So as long as somebody's, moving their project along, we're almost certain to grant extensions to get the project over the finish line. So that concludes my part of the presentation. We have Meredith Pabst with AT&T and Kathy Putt with Crown Castle to give you the industry perspective on this. So thank you for your time.
Commissioner Hardesty, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy and Emily, for that presentation. I guess my question is, are there opportunities to, as the permitting process goes through, is there a specific checklist that has to be signed off on? Because I asked this question because I'm thinking about this industry from another perspective. As you know, they tear up our streets to put these wireless wires in, yet there's no maintenance that they are responsible for actually paying to keep our streets good, which they're aren't. So I'm just wondering whether it's part of the permitting process that we, if we're going to make a change like that, is that where that would happen? Or would it happen in another venue, like with the Office of Technology? Do you know?
Well, Emily, you were about to say something too, but the Office of Technology, they are the ones who negotiate the contracts.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think that would be where that part of it goes. We're responsible for making sure, looking at the land use impacts and the structural impacts, and electrical too.
Thank you. That's helpful. Emily, you were going to add something?
I'll just add that BDS's purview is on property, not in the right of way. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be more of from the city's perspective, it would be more in the realm of PDAS. Yeah.
That makes sense. I was just trying to figure out how the partnership worked, but I think you answered it for me. Thank you.
Very good. And did I understand that there was additional invited testimony, or were the two individuals just there to answer potential questions?
Yeah, they actually had testimony.
Why don't we go ahead and get to that, and then maybe others will have questions after that.
Good morning. This is Meredith Pabst. Good morning, Mayor Wheeler and commissioners. I'm a consultant for AT&T, and I thank you for the time this morning. AT&T is now constantly upgrading its wireless sites to add new technology, and federal laws require expedited review of permits requested for this type of construction. AT&T appreciates staff's recent work to bring the city's application intake and review processes more in line with the federal timelines. And one improvement of note, and Nancy mentioned this, is the city's new online portal for submitting applications for site modifications, which went online in December. And AT&T and its vendors really appreciate this improvement. As noted in your packet, industry representatives have met with staff over the past few years in an effort to develop a new policy that would allow more than one so-called open permit on a site. And this policy change would facilitate the city's acceptance and efficient review of site modifications. We understand that staff's agreement to this policy improvement as part of a larger program is tied to the code change before you today, in which revisions to the code governing the life of a wireless application and an issued wireless permit would be changed to, in effect, make it more difficult to get a permit extension. From AT&T's perspective, this code change can be workable with reasonable criteria for an extension. We understand staff intends to work on these criteria in the upcoming program guide, and we appreciate staff's continuing commitment to working with industry on the guide. Just a couple of thoughts about reasonableness for your perspective today. One example of whether the new rules will be feasible is when a carrier must special order expensive concealment materials for a wireless site. City of Portland typically requires what's called stealthing or concealment measures on a site. Say, for instance, when antennas are attached to a building facade, there are special materials that are used to make that addition to the facade blend in more visually to the overall building. A carrier will not place the order for these specialized materials until its permit is approved, especially if it's a custom design. Then it is not uncommon for it to take 180 days for those specialized materials to arrive. In cases such like this, it would be reasonable to grant another extension, or excuse me, an extension for another 180 days in order to complete the construction. Second, AT&T believes that it should be relevant whether another carrier has proposed a dependent project. If there will be no adverse effect to another party, then it should be easier for a permit holder to extend its permit to complete the construction. And this saves time and effort of both staff and the applicant, and is consistent with the city's goals of efficient and collaborative implementation of its building code. And these, of course, are the types of discussions that AT&T anticipates having as the program guide is developed. Thank you again for your time. And I wanted to thank staff, especially Nancy Thorrington, for the hard work that has been going into this project. And I'm happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you.
So yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. For the record, my name is Kathy Putt. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for Crown Castle, which is a communications infrastructure provider here in Portland. On behalf of Crown Castle, we've appreciated the opportunity to work with BDS to review and offer comments on the proposed code changes which are before you today. Generally speaking, we believe the timelines included in the proposed code amendments are both reasonable and doable, and therefore we urge your adoption. As a shared infrastructure provider, we see this as just the very first step toward achieving greater flexibility in permitting that will hopefully allow us to work on multiple projects for multiple customers on a single communications facility at the same time. And to that end, we very much look forward to working with BDS in the development of their policy guide in the coming weeks. And really, that's all I had at this time. Thank you for your time and your willingness to consider these changes.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for your testimony. Colleagues, are there any further questions about this before I ask for public testimony? Seeing none, is there any public testimony, Keelan?
2 people have signed up to give testimony.
Okay, this is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Thanks all for the presentation.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to item 195 on the regular agenda.
Mayor, we have 2 people signed up for public testimony.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said there weren't.
Oh, sorry. Yes, 2 people.
Okay, I apologize. I misheard you. Let's hear them.
Okay, perfect. First up, we have Caitlin Nissen.
Hello, good morning. I just had a question about the new permits of abandonment, expiration, and extensions. I'm just curious if that applies to the structures we will see in coming months for the shelter to housing continuum. So that was my question, and that the rest of my testimony kind of does depend on that.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. This is Emily. You know, Caitlin, I don't know the answer to that question, but I can certainly follow up with you. That emergency ordinance has been handled by a different group in BDS, and I'm not fully connected to it.
Okay, yeah, I would just be curious if those extensions would apply to that, just out of curiosity. I don't really have very much to say. That was just kind of my main question, and my testimony was going to be based on that answer. So I am signed up for a testimony later today, but assumably that will not be able to, due to the topic is different, so I probably won't be able to talk about it at that time. But yeah, I'm not sure if there's any way to get an answer on that, but I feel like that is a very important thing for the community to be aware about if these extensions do apply to the emergency order. So I think before the emergency order is at least put into place or voted on, if the city council could at least address the answer to that question would be appreciated. And that is my testimony. Thank you so much.
Hey, Caitlin, thank you for that. Maybe we could do it. We're actually not going to vote on this today. It's a non-emergency ordinance, so there will be more time and opportunity for people to submit written testimony via email. So Emily, could we get you to track down an answer to that and get back to Caitlin? And then if Caitlin wants to provide us additional written testimony, she would have that opportunity to do so.
I certainly will do that within the next day.
Awesome, thanks.
And if I could ask, how will I be followed up with? Will it be email or?
Yeah, Caitlin, I have your email from the council testimony sign up. So I can send you an email, but I'm also at emily.sandy@portlandoregon.gov.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Next up, we have Edith Gillis.
Morning, Edith.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, Edith. You sound good.
I'm wanting to say this is my 40th year living in Portland along Oregon highway roads. And this is in Southwest Portland, Northwest Portland, Northeast and Southeast Portland. And I've seen the biggest danger to Portlanders. We're talking about safety, education, and engagement. The biggest danger to safety is about policing and policing policies. So we need to we need to stop and frisk, and we need to stop high-speed traffic chases, and we need to replace cops with unarmed rapid response to protect intersections and people at locations, and replace them with camera enforcement. And we need to ban the the use of cops in harassing people along the roadways who are unhoused, and shooting from moving vehicles and running red lights. We need to prosecute the Johns and stop criminalizing, harassing, and raping, terrorizing, and arresting the sex workers, the sex slaves, the kidnapped children, and the rape victims, especially along 82nd. We need to install sidewalks, pedestrian bridges, low growing nature-scaped stormwater veils along the sections, extend the sidewalk out. We need to improve the timing at pedestrian and traffic lights and install bike lights as they do in Holland. Now, regarding those are policing or engineering. When it comes to community education, I want to partner with IRCO, Immigrant Refugee Community of Oregon, on safe and culturally appropriate pedestrian and bicycle and human routes. I need us to engage more with the awesome, incredible Polo Renault Catalani, who's worked a lot with different immigrant organizations and communities, speaks the language and understands the culture, has worked with the city. We need to work with Street Trust, that is formerly known as the Portland Bicycle Transportation Alliance, and OATS, the Oregon Active Transportation Summit, not just for the event, but for the ongoing networking. And we need to work with Black Liberation Ride, not just the event and the organizer, but the network, and Black Girls Ride. We need to work with the Community Cycling Center and PDX Bikes for Humanity and other organizations for designing, building, training, and giving sweat equity for public service, exchange for bike trailers for children, for groceries, and small businesses having bike, like soups on bike. We need to design and distribute human-powered and battery-assisted wheeled transport, like pedicabs.
Thank you, Edith. Thank you. And Edith, could I please make a polite recommendation? And this, I mean this with admiration for you. You're a regular contributor to the public dialogue here at City Council, and we all respect what you say. But could I encourage you to sign up for communications at the beginning of the agenda? You'd get your full time for communications, but it is somewhat disrespectful to the staff members who are here and waiting to have their issues heard. It's disrespectful to other people who signed up for public testimony on other items who have been waiting for several hours to testify on specific issues. As you know, we have communications at the beginning of the council session for the purpose of discussing anything with the City Council that you'd like. But this is not that time. This is the time to speak specifically to this particular ordinance and these particular code changes. So I ask you respectfully and politely in the future, if you could adhere to those rules, which the entire council and presumably those who enter our virtual chamber agree to. Thank you. Keelan, does that complete public testimony for this item?
Yes.
Colleagues, any further discussion before I move it? This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. And now to the regular agenda, item number 195.
Amend Portland Utility Board Code with housekeeping changes for clarity and to increase equity and inclusion.
Colleagues, item 195 will be referred back to the office of the mayor. Item 196, please.
Authorize price agreements for on-call land survey services to support design and construction of sanitary and stormwater collection systems, treatment facilities, and watershed restoration projects in amount not to exceed $10,500,000.
Colleagues, this ordinance would authorize price agreements for on-call professional land survey services for the Bureau of Environmental Services. Scott Schneider from Procurement Services and Mike Pomomo from the Bureau of Environmental Services are here to present on the ordinance and answer any questions anybody might have about the project. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor, and good morning, Commissioners. I'm Scott Schneider from Procurement Services, and also with me this morning is Mike Pomomo from the Bureau of Environmental Services. We're here to recommend council authorize the chief procurement officer to enter into 3 price agreements for land surveying services. These price agreements support the Bureau of Environmental Services in their design and construction of wastewater collection and treatment and watershed restoration projects. On September 3rd, 2020, the city issued request for proposals number 1509 for on-call land surveying services. And on September 24th, 11 proposals were received. An evaluation committee scored the proposals in accordance with Chapter 5.68 of City Code and deemed Parametrics Inc., Emurio Design LLC, and AKS Engineering and Forestry LLC as the most responsive and qualified proposers. The city's aspirational 20% subcontracting equity goal applies to these services, and proposers committed to subcontracting 20% to consultants certified by the State Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity. All awardees are in full compliance with the city contracting requirements, and we recommend you authorize these contract awards. If you have any questions about the procurement process, I can answer those. And also, if you have any program-related questions, I will turn it over to Mike.
Does that complete your presentation then?
It does.
All right, colleagues, any questions? Seeing none, Keelan, do we have any testimony on this item?
No one has signed up to give testimony.
Very good. This is a first reading of a non-emergency ordinance. It moves to second reading. Item 197, please.
Authorize price agreements for wastewater treatment and structural engineering services in support of the Bureau of Environmental Services Columbia Boulevard Wastewater Treatment Plant in amount not to exceed $17,125,000.
Colleagues, we've already received a thorough presentation on this. There's been an opportunity for public testimony. This is a second reading of a non-emergency ordinance. Please call the roll. Keelan?
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's a second reading. Can you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Rubio.
Aye.
Ryan.
Aye.
Hardesty.
I greatly appreciated the presentation last week. The concerns I raised about this $17 million contract and whether or not we would achieve our goals around ensuring equitable contracting are still major concerns of mine in this proposal. And because of that, this one and the other one that we just read actually will contract with the same companies. So I'm not comfortable voting yes on this when I see we have almost $30 million going to a very narrow group of companies with no clear plan on how we're going to engage minority business owners and women business owners in this project. So I will vote no.
Maps.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance is adopted. Next item, please, 198.
Amend contract term with Versaterm Inc. for application software support and increase compensation in amount not to exceed $5,990,000.
Colleagues, item 198 amends a current contract with Versaterm Incorporated, which expires on July 13th of 2021. This is a proposed 3-year extension of the contract, which supports the Police Bureau's records management system. Funding will come from the existing Police Bureau General Fund resources. With the financial impacts of the COVID pandemic and the need to fill budget deficits, PPB had to abort the purchase of a new records management system back in 2020. Maintaining the current system with the assistance of Versaterm's maintenance services will allow the Portland Police Bureau to continue regional contributions to law enforcement information. Senior Program Manager Tammy Mayer is here to provide additional details on the contract, and Senior Business Manager Ken Lee is also here to answer any questions that people might have. Welcome. Is there anybody here from the Portland Police Bureau? Tammy, are you on? Ken, are you on? Then I'll pull this one back to my office. Next item is item 199.
Approve limited tax exemptions for properties under the Homebuyer Opportunity Limited Tax Exemption Program.
Commissioner Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Colleagues, on behalf of the City of Portland, the Portland Housing Bureau administers the Homebuyer Opportunity Limited Tax Exemption Program, also known as the HOLTE program, which provides a 10-year property tax exemption for low to moderate income home buyers, making home ownership more obtainable for families in Portland. Excuse me. Home builders apply for the tax exemption prior to starting construction on a new home. The Housing Bureau approves builder applications through filing a resolution with the council several years at a time. 9 properties are being approved for the program through this resolution. Statute requires the approval of any exemption applications prior to April 1st for them to be effective for the 2021 tax year, which starts July 1. This resolution is being submitted to include these 9 properties and exemptions beginning in 2021. Dory Van Bockel from the Housing Bureau's Development Incentives Program is here if we have any questions. Thanks, Dory, for being here. So, Mayor, I don't know if anyone has any questions. It doesn't look like it.
Yeah, I'm worried that we have the invasion of the body snatchers going on here.
I know everyone's dropping off.
and Dory, she's usually so reliable. She must be here somewhere. Dory, are you?
Yeah, Dory's here. I see her.
Oh, I'm here. Oh, there you are. Welcome. How are you doing?
But she's just here to answer questions. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Okay, does anybody have any questions on this particular one? I'm seeing a bunch of head shaking. No. Very good. This is a resolution. Well, I should ask, is there any public testimony on this item, Keelan?
No, no one signed up.
All right, why don't you go ahead and call the roll, please?
Rubio.
Aye.
Ryan.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Next item, item number 200. Look at that. We've already gotten through 200 items so far this year. 200, big 200.
Assess benefited properties for street, sidewalk, stormwater, and mast arm traffic signal improvements at the Northwest 23rd Avenue, Vaughn Street, and US 30 intersection in the Northwest 20th Avenue Local Improvement District.
This is a second reading. We've already heard public testimony on this item. We've heard a presentation. Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Rubio.
Aye.
Ryan.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye, the ordinance is adopted. Back to 198. Apparently Tammy was on, but could not figure out how to unmute or had some technical problems. So if you could read 198 again, please.
Amend contract term with Versiterm Inc. for application software support and increase compensation in amount not to exceed $5,990,000.
Tammy, are you there?
I see her name, but
Yeah, it's Tammy, are you, if you're on the phone, try *6, see if that helps. Okay, is she good? Yeah, Tammy, it looks like you're unmuted now. Can you try talking if you can hear me? Let's do this. Do you, and don't say this out loud, but can we get her phone number? And while we're in the next item, Tammy, if you can hear me, I'm going to call you on your city cell. I'm going to track it down and I'm just going to have you present through the telephone. So we'll track you down during the next item. Can you look that up and please call call her on your cell. We'll get you on here in a minute, Tammy. Thank you for your patience. The next item then would be back to the consent agenda item. I believe it was 192, which was pulled. Is that correct, Keelan?
That's correct.
Why don't you go ahead and read 192, please?
Accept a grant in the amount of $32,250 from Oregon Department of Transportation. Authorize intergovernmental agreement for transportation safety programs, education, and encouragement for people walking, biking, and driving, and appropriate $30,000 in FY 2020-21.
Commissioner Hardesty.
I believe Edith pulled this off. Is Edith still here?
Yes, Edith is still on the call. Edith, are you able to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I must have misunderstood the clerk's email to me saying that all of the things that I had registered to sign up for, I would not be allowed to except for 192. So when I heard my name, I started to testify about 192.
I see.
Okay.
Oh, that becomes very clear now.
That makes sense. Thank you for that clarification. That's helpful because I think we all liked your testimony. We just weren't sure how it was relevant to the ordinance that was being discussed. So thank you for that. So is there anything else you wanted to add, or did you pretty much get it out?
No, I didn't say it out. I have a traumatic brain injury caused by the police, and so I get confused and I can't just email you testimony. So what part of traffic safety and this ODOT grant is about engineering, education, enforcement. So I tried to say what you could do about enforcement and about education and collaboration, especially with folks that are marginalized and excluded and are living in the areas where there's the most highest crash rates, where I have also lived most of the last 40 years. So I was talking about what communities and organizations have existing things for human transportation, and working with IRCO and others to find out what we can do to make it humanly safe and emotionally so safe for people as it is not now. And design and distribute the human-powered battery-assisted vehicles. A lot of us with disabilities, and not just those of us that are caused by police brutality, cannot bend over and do a bike, but we could stand up, or we could do battery assist in incumbent or different positions that we cannot afford, but we can certainly have enough resources available and equity or as in community cycling programs to develop for folks. And provide permanent work sites and ever upgraded with the memorials to people who are killed and seriously injured at different sites, as well as having not just with this grant, but use this grant to leverage community collaboration and engagement with other folks by the city first earning the trust of community members, so that we have permanent, respectful memorials at sites assessed by drivers. We have the Ghost Bike program. We can expand that. And I would like to have at the top of those signs say the command language of what could have, if someone had done that, would not result in a death. For example, on Southeast Hawthorne, where a wealthy Saudi was speeding down the road, ran through a girl who was legally walking on the sidewalk, to simply say, drive 20 or lower, yield to pedestrians. And then below that, give a little bit of the facts and honor the individual. Have those, there's a lot of classes along each second, after Division and Powell. Have those.
So excuse me, Edith, if I may. I appreciate all the recommendations you have for transforming PBOT and their work with ODOT and TriMet. This particular issue, however, is really about us being able to pay for construction workers that will be doing community projects that are already underway. Because of the city's limited budget, we are partnering with TriMet to use some of their professional staff in this effort. So Edith has some fabulous recommendations, and many of those are things that we're already talking about. And I'm happy to have that conversation offline. But today, this particular proposal is really just about being able to hire professional staff and having this partnership with TriMet so that we can share staff on some of these projects that we have in common. And
we can get more bang out of the buck, the staff, if they're more informed by the community. And
I appreciate
part
that.
Of a larger picture.
Edith, we do have community projects that are taking place to engage the community's voice as we move forward. We've got a lot of big work to do in transportation. But again, today I'm asking my colleagues to support a proposal to help us pay professional staff as a partnership with TriMet. Thank you.
And I support that. Bye.
Thank you, Edith. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Edith. So that completes public testimony in this item. Is that correct, Keelan?
Yes.
This is an emergency ordinance consent agenda. Call the roll.
Rubio.
Aye.
Ryan.
Aye.
Hardesty.
Aye.
Maps. Wheeler.
Aye. The ordinance passes. And last but not least, we have Tammy on the phone with me here. Item 198. Can you just read it once more, Keelan, just so we're all up and legal and all that?
Yes. Amend contract term with Versaterm Inc. for application software support and increase compensation in amount not to exceed $5,990,000.
All right. And I already read the introduction. Tammy, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. City Council members, I apologize for the technical difficulties. I was talking, but no one could hear me. This contract this ordinance will amend our current contract with Versaterm, who provides the the records management system that the officers enter reports into for the region project. It's the current contract that we have is ending on the 13th of July of this year. And this will provide us some additional funds to move forward with a 3-year extension on that current contract. And then at that 3-year point, we will decide where we're going to go from there. Do you have any questions?
Yes, Commissioner Hardesty has a question. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Is this the contract that we weren't able to get out of that was probably will go down in history as the worst contract the city of Portland has ever signed?
Yes, ma'am. It is the same contract. We were in the process of doing an RFP to pick a new vendor. We had actually finished the scoring and had picked a new vendor. Unfortunately, with the fiscal impacts of 2020, we weren't able to continue with that RFP and we had to terminate it. So we're asking to extend the current contract for 3 years, hoping that in 3 years, the fiscal outlook will be a little better and we can relook at other vendors for this system.
I'm just shocked that we would even entertain extending this contract. This is a really, really bad data system. Many other police agencies have dropped out of it. We were impatiently waiting for this contract to be up. The city council actually dedicated funds in the Police Bureau's budget to replace this data system. And I just can't imagine why we would want to extend this very poor data system for another 3 years. That's just not acceptable to me.
I understand, ma'am. It's just we do not have the money to move forward. We estimate it will cost somewhere between $4 and $6 million to implement the new system that we have chosen.
And how much money did we
do not have that in our budget?
How much money did we give you last year that was set aside specifically to replace this data system?
I believe that was $300,000. That was to hire the consultants that would help us through this project, and we've used them up until the point where we terminated the RFP.
There must be a better alternative than for us to be stuck with a broken system for another 3 years.
Yes, ma'am, I understand. This system actually works. It's just not user-friendly, and it frustrates a lot of the officers that have to enter the reports. It works, and it's functional. It's just not the best system out there. We can continue using it for another 3 years. We're looking at possibly moving to their cloud version to make it a little bit easier. But at this point, we really don't have an option because we don't have the money to make the switch. It is very expensive to implement a new system. It takes approximately a year. We would have to stand up all new servers. We would have to do data conversion. It's a very lengthy and costly expense.
I appreciate that, and we've been working on it for 2 years, and my newer colleagues just don't understand the history of this particular contractor, and every time another policing agency drops out, the city of Portland is required to pay more. And
yes, ma'am. And we just lost Multnomah County at the beginning of this month, and it is very possible we will lose another one before the end of the calendar year.
So I just say there's no way I would support a 5-year extension of a contract that's so poorly written that doesn't benefit the city of Portland at all. And it's not what we have directed the police bureau to do around addressing this horrible data system that was purchased by somebody that nobody knows who did it. Mayor, we've had this conversation many times over the last couple of years. I'm just shocked that somebody would bring a proposal back and want us to do another 5 years with this company. Just seems inexcusable. Did we fix the flaws in it is my last question. Are we just renewing the same contract that will again make us pay much more every time somebody else drops out?
Steps to sort of rebalance the funding side. We had a RUB meeting, a Region User Board meeting earlier this month on the 16th, and I proposed getting rid of the master IGA, which controls the governance of this system. All the current agencies voted yes. So when this current contract ends in July, we will no longer have the master IGA, and we are in the process of rewriting and coordinating with the other agencies on the participant IGA, which will rebalance, and the agencies will pay their full user share in the cost for the system. However, we are still the majority of the system by leaps and bounds. The next highest agency is Gresham, I believe, sitting around 198-ish officers. So we quadruple the next highest agency in the sworn members that contribute to this system. But I am taking steps to rebalance the cost share of the program.
Commissioner Rubio.
I have a quick question as someone who's new to this conversation. As you know, there's fear in the immigrant community about when it comes to data collection, and particularly access by ICE and federal enforcement. Can you tell me who has access to this database in terms of, when you're mentioning in the material it said regional partners have access to this? Yes. Can you talk about who, and then, or if it's easier, can we get a list so that we can understand who?
Yes, ma'am. I can send everyone a list, but the current users, agency-wise, that input into this system are, let's see, I'm pulling up my Excel now. Columbia County Sheriff's Office, Gresham, Lake Oswego, Port of Portland, Portland State University, Scappoose, St. Helens. Those are the agencies that are left in this regional system, with the withdrawal of Multnomah County just happening a few weeks ago. There are also a number of inquiry-only agencies. Let me pull up that list. Bear with me 1 minute. But most of them are parole and probation kind of agencies, or other agencies that aren't law enforcement. Some of them are law enforcement, like Vancouver, even though they left as a full entry system or entry partner, they are in as a query-only agency. Here's my query list. It's coming up. Here we go. All the way at the beginning. Okay, query-only agencies right now are the ATF, Camas Police Department, Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, the Clark County Police Department, Multnomah County Juvenile, Multnomah County Medical Examiner, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. We're in the process of bringing that online right now. OHSU, OLCC, the Oregon DOJ, OSP, PCC Public Safety, Tigard Police, U.S. Parole and Probation, Vancouver Police, and Washington County Community Corrections.
Thank you.
And I can send you that list when I get off the call.
Very good. Thank you, Tammy. So I have a couple of comments I'll put out at this moment. First of all, just in case people don't know what Commissioner Hardesty was referring to, this contract is, in fact, I agree with her, probably the most poorly structured contract I've ever seen, because it did not include an opt-out clause for the city of Portland on one hand. And on the other hand, it made the city of Portland singularly responsible for paying the total cost of the project, even if other partners pulled out. In other words, if other law enforcement agencies decided, we don't like Versaterm, we want to move to a different platform, the city of Portland would pay, or not the city alone, the remaining partners in the pool would then have to pay the additional cost that was previously paid for by the partner that pulled out. And so it's a classic last one in the pool gets their hide nailed to the wall, and we had no opt-out. And so I want you to know, I'm not walking into this like some idiot who doesn't see what's going on here. I actually directed our legal counsel to do an investigation as to whether or not we had the legal ability to withdraw from this contract. I questioned whether it was even legal to have a contract with literally no opt-out for the customer, which is what this original contract term had in place. The conclusion was no, we're stuck with it. And so what I want you to know is 2 years ago, I did put money in, we had crafted a proposed budget that was effectively a no-cut budget that included the funding that Tammy just mentioned for us to make that transition to a new provider. And we were all very happy about that. Then, of course, the economy went off a cliff as a result of COVID, and we had to find $95 million in reductions. And any software or systems related project that was not already underway towards fulfillment citywide was eliminated as part of trying to close that $95 million gap. So we have a choice before us, and we don't have to make it today because this is not an emergency ordinance. If there is an interest on the part of the city council finding an additional Tammy, is it $3.5 million? What did you say the cost would be?
The low to high, it ranges from 4 to 6 million.
If the council over the course of the next week prior to the final vote would like to find an additional $4 to $6 million in this budget for the purpose of making that transition now, that's option A. Option B is this option, which is extend the contract. And I believe, Tammy, the term is 3 years. Is that correct? It's not 5?
Yes, 3 years.
It's 3 years. So neither is a great choice, but given the fiscal constraints that we're currently under, my preference would be to plug my nose and vote yes to extend a contract that's not particularly favorable with a product that we don't particularly like, but at least it gets us to what will hopefully be a better economic environment that will allow us to make the jump in 3 years. That's where I'm coming from. Commissioner Hardesty?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me just say I do not support extending this contract for 3 years. This is a giveaway of public dollars to a company that is not worthy of receiving these dollars. The fact that we are increasing salary by $5 million for a 3-year contract sounds really ludicrous to me. And I am really disappointed that the Bureau would schedule this without actually coming around and having conversations with us prior to actually scheduling it for a city council hearing. Clearly, they knew that I knew a lot more about this system than I ever wanted to know. And my colleagues are too new to understand the significant resources that have been squandered on this system. I think there must be a third alternative, and I think the police bureau should work with the city council to determine what that third alternative could be.
Commissioner Maps.
I'd just like to say, I think we're having a vigorous agreement here. I'm relatively new to this topic, but I've also have followed it a little bit. I see the police department wishing for better software. I see members of council being dissatisfied with our options here. And I appreciate the fact that it appears that we have maybe a week to have some internal dialogue to figure out how we can move forward. I think that would be healthy for the police bureau, the council, and the city.
Tammy, what is the, thank you, Commissioner Maps. What is the drop dead date? When do you have to make this decision? Could we extend this a couple of weeks?
We could extend it a couple of weeks, but that gives us less time to negotiate changes into the current contract, because I know Versaterm has some things that they did not like out of the first, and I know our city council or our city attorney, Calais, would like to change some things too. So once we had approval from you, we were going to start the negotiation process on the contract, but I'm sure we have a few weeks.
So Tammy, why don't we do this? Could you make a good faith effort over the course of the next week to meet with my colleagues, assuming you're the right person to do that? And,
I am.
And could you work with them to generate, Commissioner Hardesty is suggesting there might be a third way or some alternatives. If there are, I certainly want to hear them. So could we commit to do that over the course of the next week? And then if we need to extend this another week, I'm certainly happy to do that.
Yes, sir. I can reach out to all the commissioners' offices and set something up.
Awesome. Good. I appreciate it. Colleagues, does that seem like a good resolution? Good. Okay. I'm seeing head shakes. Tammy, you can't see it because you're on the phone. Keelan, is there any, oh, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, Keelan, is there any public testimony on this item?
No one signed up.
Okay, good. So this is a first reading of the non-emergency ordinance. You'll all be hearing from Tammy. This moves to second reading. And Keelan, I believe that completes our business for this morning. Is that correct?
Yes, it does.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. We're adjourned till 2 p.m.